Hello and welcome to Legalbytes. If you're new here, my name is Alyte. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. We don't give legal advice, but we do talk about how the law works and try to look into our crystal ball to see how things might turn out. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, we'd love it if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, all the great YouTube-y stuff. And if you want to listen while out and about, we're now offering our live streams in podcast form where you can leave a rating and review. Links are in the description below, as well as to our clips channel where you can find some of the best clips taken from our live streams. Otherwise, if you want to catch me elsewhere, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so on Locals, Patreon, or by becoming a YouTube member, or by buying some really awesome Legalbytes merch. Again, all links are in the description below. And with that said, let's get into it. I forgot I muted all of us. Now that I bungled that up. Hello. Welcome, Biters in the Bite Club. Welcome back. It's been a few days since we had a live stream on this channel. I hope that everyone is having a good day and having a good week. Welcome back, Dr. Honda. You've been here a couple times on the channel throughout this trial. And welcome for the first time, Dr. Tracy. I'm so excited to have both of you here. Before we get through some introductions, let me just say one thing about super chats, because I want to make sure that people see it before folks start sending things in. Because they're here for 1 hour, I want to be respectful of their time. So if there's a super chat or a question in the chat that feels like it kind of fits into the conversation naturally, I'll bring it up. But otherwise, I'm going to reserve super chats for the end, maybe for a little bit of time while they're still here. And then afterwards, any that are left over, I'll kind of stick around for a while after they go on their merry way with their schedules and, the rest of their days. So that way we can kind of keep the conversation going. That is about it then. Okay. So for anybody that is somehow unfamiliar with you both, why don't you guys kind of tell us about yourselves, your channels, and the basically what it is that you do and why you do what we do, I guess. We'll start with Dr. Honda, since you've been here for a minute.
Yeah, my name's Kirk, and I have been a professor and therapist for 25 years and a podcaster and YouTuber for 14 years.
Excellent. Dr. Tracy.
I'm Dr. Courtney Tracy. I make YouTube videos. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, doctor of clinical psychology. And I think what I'm going to bring to this live stream, which is unique, and please don't come at me until you've heard me speak, I am diagnosed with borderline personality disorder.
And I think that is one of the things that actually, that was how I found you, was because someone had sent me your video, your live stream where you were talking about that. And I thought that was so fascinating. And that was one of the things that I kind of said early on was I know as soon as some kind of a diagnosis comes up, especially with someone who people have a lot of opinions about, people will tend to take that diagnosis and kind of extend that across the board. So that's been one of the things that's been very important to me, has been to say, like, okay, like, just because this is one person who is showing certain signs and she's been connected with this kind of a diagnosis, that doesn't mean that this is the same thing across the board. So I guess we could kind of start with that one. So borderline personality disorder, what exactly is it? What are your experiences with it, both of you in a clinical setting, and Dr. Tracy in your personal life? I mean, obviously you had a long live stream where you spent a lot of time talking about it, so you can't probably get into all the details here, but basically, what can you talk about it now?
It's basically, I mean, the root of it is fear of abandonment. I mean, on my live stream, I went through all of the symptoms and how they personally came up for me. It's difficulty controlling your emotions. It's taking those emotions out on the people around you or on yourself, depending upon your specific presentation. And you can assume that with fear of abandonment and difficulty controlling your emotions, that would lead to unstable relationships, and along with a lack of self and feelings of emptiness, we try to fill that void with sometimes impulsivity and these emotions that make us feel full, and it can result in a lot of harm done onto others. And that's usually what I talked a lot about on my live stream. but it can also cause harm to yourself. And I think the biggest misconception is that people with borderline personality disorder don't care about what they're doing, don't feel guilt or shame about what they're doing. And that's not true for the majority of people with borderline personality disorder. I will caveat that with the guilt and shame. The biggest issue often is that the guilt and shame isn't the thing that results in behavior change, because that just feels so bad also. And so we pull away from those feelings too. And that gets us into situations like, can't say that Amber Heard does or does not, because I can't diagnose her. But with this presentation of behavior, it can look like this, and that causes people to have misconceptions. And the pain that can be caused causes the stigma that we see, because nobody deserves pain, whether or not it's coming from a disorder.
Good point. Good point. Dr. Honda, what are your thoughts on how this sort of has come up in common parlance and common conversation, and in the trial, I guess, especially?
Yeah, lots to say, but in brief, first I'll say, Dr. Tracy, I deeply commend you for coming forth about your diagnosis to the public and reducing stigma. I'm sure you're leading the way for a lot of people to feel better about themselves and to get the treatment that they need. It's a massively stigmatized label in not only the public discourse, but also in among colleagues. For example, it's not uncommon for me to hear in certain circles around other clinicians that one, they either won't work with people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder because they don't want to do the work for it. That's the way I would put it. Or they believe they're untreatable, which is empirically just not true. Or they just have these misconceptions around it. So the fact that the public has misconceptions is not surprising, given that even within my own field, there's a lot of misconceptions. And for me, I learned early in my career, I became a specialist in personality disorders early in my career because some of my most first prominent clients had personality disorders, most namely borderline, and learned very quickly what it was like for those individuals and worked long term with them and really got into it with them, really into how they felt about their relationship with me. And, and so I really dove into the research and the clinical literature going back to the early 20th century and psychoanalysts first talking about it. And it's been a gratifying part of my career to actually help these people, not only just because of, evidence-based treatment for it, but also being a rare therapist that actually even accepts clients like this, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, that it's incredible that there are. It sounds like quite a few that just simply won't treat it because of, I guess, the difficulty level in doing it. Are there any certain sort of like methods or strategies that you've found that make it more likely to treat it, or make it more likely for treatment to be effective in your practices? Or yeah.
Do you treat, Dr. Tracy, people with borderline?
Oh, yeah, I do. I'm sorry. I thought that she was specifically asking you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no,
okay.
for both of you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, dialectical behavioral therapy is what saved my life. I don't usually use the typical form of DBT. It's a very structured protocol, but mindfulness, I'm a moderate Buddhist. That's really what changed my life. Accepting the feeling of emptiness, finding the middle path, stepping outside of black and white, learning to control my emotions and pause and reflect and develop the sense of self that I wasn't capable of developing when I was younger, as my personality was coming to fruition. And so I try to engage in those practices with my clients as well. And often a lot of the symptoms of borderline personality disorder are present in many other mental health disorders. And so I fuse that same type of practice of mindfulness, emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and learning how to have interpersonal relationships with people. Because one of the main issues that I had was, as I was becoming a therapist, I thought, can I do this? I don't think I have empathy. Like, I don't think I have the ability to see somebody else from their perspective. And that wasn't true. I'm now, anybody that follows me knows I'm very compassionate and very empathetic. And I realized that the issue was that I wasn't allowing myself to see myself and my pain and my suffering. I would rather feel empty than acknowledge those things. And so when I'm working with anybody under any circumstances, it's acknowledging what's the underlying emotion? What am I avoiding in myself? How can I create a new sense of self? And that allowed me to see other people and their sense of self, and that they can be adjusted based off of the behaviors that I was enacting. And that's one of the big things is, I think people think that when they're treating people with borderline personality disorder, the people that don't want to treat it, it's that they have to submit to the behavior and sort of normalize the behavior and make it seem like the behavior is okay. And that's not the case, right? Like, the pain that we inflict onto other people needs to be addressed. And so it's important. That's kind of my main work, is like, you have pain, you're putting that pain onto other people and onto yourself. And just because you're hurt doesn't mean you need to keep hurting. So it's kind of like the non-clinical perspective of what it is that I do in a non-systemized way.
Yeah. And so much of what you just described, I feel like, can be applied across the board, regardless of personality disorder or mental health issue or anything. It's just like really good practices, I feel like, for anyone going through this crazy life, right?
Yeah.
But that's incredible to hear that's been helpful to you, because that feels like something that is attainable by a lot of people. Like, those are practices, like I said, that could be used across the board. So to hear that would be helpful for that is also great. Dr. Honda, do you have any other like strategies that you've sort of employed that are maybe a little bit different for helping people with BPD?
Well, Dr. Tracy laid it out better than I could in terms of the what I would call like the first few years of therapy with people with borderline. In parallel with that and after that, and I don't know if Dr. Tracy was actually including this in what she was saying, but a big focus later on, once we have the luxury to do so, is to create corrective experiences where they can internalize the security of their relationship with me, because it can be very challenging to navigate relationships outside of the office. We want to use the therapeutic relationships so that they can learn how to trust, how to mentalize, how to be inside my mind, because they'll often, because of their abandonment traumas, will be worried about what's going through other people's minds, and will have ideas, false ideas about what's going on in other people's minds. And so to check in with me and to learn that trust, and that can take a long time. And then the idea is, and this is usually what happens, is through that they can generalize that trust to the outside world and start developing secure relationships with other people, and learn that they're good enough and lovable, and they matter, and other people generally won't exploit them, and that other people can be trusted. So that's where the long-term healing comes into play.
Okay. Awesome. So it sounds like basically the hallmark of BPD is this fear of abandonment from what it sounds like. Is there anything else that you would say is one of like the bigger hallmarks of BPD that you would recognize in your practice or just generally speaking?
I mean, I would just say unstable relationships, because that's going to happen as a result of fear of abandonment, because if you don't feel stable, you can't create a stable relationship with the person, especially if you can't accurately interpret what they're doing or how they're feeling or why they're doing or feeling the way that they are. It's going to cause serious issues. And it does.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. So then another one that has come up in this trial is histrionic personality disorder. And maybe this also will, if I bring up this question, maybe you guys can kind of talk about them at the same time. Objectionable law, Ashley D. Harrison says, perhaps the doctors can explain the differences between cluster B and C PDs. So I certainly don't know the difference between the two. I don't know if you guys can answer this. And then along with talking, I don't know if it's connected with histrionic personality disorder or what. Maybe you guys can kind of help me navigate that.
Well, I don't use the clusters in my conceptualization, so I actually have to Google it to remind myself because I actually don't. They don't make a lot of sense in terms of how I mean, certainly cluster B, which is where borderline and histrionic reside with narcissism. They do hang together. Antisocial to me has nothing to do with the other three, so I don't even know why that's lumped in there. Cluster
Okay.
C is what we call the anxious fearful cluster, which is avoidant dependent and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And I guess I mean, avoidant and dependent can often go hand in hand because avoidant people are, in a nutshell, pathologically socially anxious and are convinced of the, usually when you're socially anxious and you suffer from social anxiety, there's usually a component of insight. They'll be like, yeah, I'm a shy person. But with avoidant people, they actually believe that the other people have constant negative thoughts about who they are when it's very unlikely that they would. And it's about often very strange things. Like, everyone knows that my nose looks very strange, and it's a product of traumas when they're growing up that are often very critical of them. And dependency is, what people on the internet would call codependent, and that's actually not accurate. But dependent personality disorders, you're very dependent on another person, again, as a result of early childhood trauma. But obsessive compulsive personality disorder, to me, has nothing to do with the other two. I mean, you could argue that they all kind of generate from similar traumas growing up. So, the differences between the two, generally the way people describe it are, people in cluster B are more dramatic and overly emotional and kind of out there, if you will. You see their behavior. People in cluster C tend to be more internal and trying to escape from others, and you won't necessarily know that they're suffering because they're very inward. But it's an overgeneralization.
Okay. So then, when it comes to histrionic personality disorder, how does that relate to borderline personality disorder, or how similarities, differences, basically? What's the hallmark of histrionic then, I guess?
Go ahead.
You want to take that, Dr. Honda?
Okay. So histrionic is trauma when you're young regarding lack of attention. So all children need attention because the idea is that children equate attention with safety, which makes a lot of sense, right? When you're 2 years old, if you don't have parental eyes on you, then there's a lot of danger out there, and your children evolve to seek that attention, and also warmth and love and care and all those kinds of things. But the focus for the child is, I'm not getting attention. That's why I feel afraid. And so then you tack on like abuse and mistreatment and other kinds of problems growing up, neglect, and the person has a locked in constant fear of lack of attention. And it's so overwhelming that it interferes with their ability to focus on all the other aspects of life, like, who am I? Who are other people? How do we really relate? What about love? That might not actually involve active attention from everyone in the room. And thus, they're 35 years old and they will just be in this constant treadmill of like, I need to be getting attention, because if I'm not getting attention, they have this overwhelming fear. And there are various different ways someone can garner attention. One is through lying to the police officers or in court or something, and getting people to feel bad for you, or lying on social media, for example. And that's, common enough, but it's not universal, of course. There are people that will use their sexuality or their body. There are people that will invent health concerns or even believe they have health concerns when, because the mind has a way of generating these things for your own benefit if it feels necessary.
Yeah.
Or very conversationally grabbing of attention. There's certain people when they walk in the room, like everyone looks at them because they just will demand attention, whether it comes across as annoying or otherwise. So that's histrionic in a nutshell.
Okay. So then, as it relates to this particular trial, I had one question from someone that was basically about like, if Amber Heard does in fact have histrionic personality disorder, would that mean that she actually believes the things that she said if they're proven to be demonstrably false? In the trial, it still has to be proven that she lied about it and that she lied with actual malice, either knowing that what she was saying was false or with reckless disregard as to the truth or falsity of it. So could that possibly interfere with that element about her knowledge of that what she was saying was false?
Absolutely. Similar to the health concern, people with histrionic will, their subconscious or just deluding themselves can get to such a level that they will believe their own lies.
Okay.
So, because one, they're desperate because they're in a constant state of fear. And two, it's just easier that way. It's easier to lie when you believe it, right?
Of course. Yeah.
I want to say also that being someone that's I came out about this on my live stream. A lot of the behaviors that are being seen in this case are behaviors that I have taken part in, like lying on the stand and lying about being the initiator of violence in my past relationships. And so I've gone through this experience of first not knowing about, I really did not understand my behaviors and how they were affecting the people around me and how they were affecting me. But then I got to a place where just like rationally, that what you're doing isn't right. Just like a general basis of being a good person and knowing that like hitting people or screaming at people or lying to people just generally is not appropriate behavior. And so understanding that rationally, but then having so much emotional pain that the emotions overtake the rationality. And I had to get to a place where I could understand my emotions and live in the rationality and only express my emotions when they were deemed societally appropriate or appropriate for the situation at hand. So I think it gets tricky because Amber, let's just say, is the only person that's really going to know if she rationally understands that her behaviors are inappropriate. And then if she emotionally understands that they're inappropriate. And it's finding that balance, is she, so it's like, does she know? Because she might know rationally. And that's where the argument comes in is, does she know this and she's doing it anyways? Or is she so emotionally distraught that the rationality isn't existing in any given moment? And the substance use that's been used in these situations, which is actually my expertise, is addiction, is that makes it impossible for the brain to function in the way that it would. And having this baseline of brain functioning with these personality disorders, if she does have them, it makes it so difficult to know. So guilty, not guilty, aware, unaware, rational, emotional. She knows the truth. And one thing I can say is her on the stand, the fact that she's lying about things that are so easily disproven really just sets it up for like, what is she thinking rationally and what is she thinking emotionally? And it makes it really difficult to kind of trust what's being said.
Yeah. And so that actually feeds into another question that I have. So I know that I think you both have said like you've never talked to her personally, so you can't really diagnose her from a distance. But what are your thoughts based on what you have seen from the testimony that's come out that you've been able to see? I imagine you probably haven't been able to catch the entire trial, and I completely understand that. There's been a lot of hours of it. But based on what you have seen, like what are your thoughts based on the diagnoses that have kind of been tossed around here between BPD, histrionic? Johnny apparently supposedly has been diagnosed with ADHD and bipolar disorder. So, what are your thoughts so far on, I mean, we could, I guess, start by focusing on Amber since we've been talking about BPD and histrionic. What are your thoughts based on that? I mean, it sounds like Dr. Tracy, it sounds like you're saying that maybe she could possibly have it based on what you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, it gets difficult to kind of make a statement like that out there, but even when I was watching the trial, the day before the Dr. Curry, I believe, came on the stand, the night before, I was like, this is so familiar. Like I was listening to the audio and I'm like, this could have been in the rooms when I was in my early 20s. Like this is the exact arguments of like, don't walk away from me. Like you said you'd be gone for 3 minutes, but you were gone for 5 minutes. And like in a way she was giving this trust and then the trust was broken. And how do you think it makes me feel when you leave me? And I was like, oh my God, oh my God, like that is it, you know? And
Yeah.
so, and then the next day the diagnosis was placed onto her. And I get it. I mean, I feel really bad because I don't think she's at a place to accept her part in these behaviors. And Johnny also to a degree, you know, but it's like they're in a court case, you know, it's like there's all this money involved. So it's unlikely that they're going to be nuanced and as honest as they could be. But if I had to say, does she meet the criteria from the evidence that I've seen and not treating her and not assessing her?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Possibly.
Dr. Honda. Okay. Yeah, possibly. Yeah. And I completely understand. Like I would not expect either of you to come out and be like, yes, she 100% has this, or no, she absolutely doesn't. Because, you know, of course, like you want to look at it as professionally as you would anyone. But yeah, Dr. Honda, do you have any thoughts on that in a similar kind of question?
Well, Dr. Tracy would know more than I would, given her lived experience that she's said. So, you know, I would defer to her on that. From my take prior to this conversation, I'm still, I don't know. I'm still in the place of I don't know. You know, I could see someone, you know, if I were to evaluate Amber Heard, would I find similar labels? Yeah, but it's also possible that I would find something else. There's certainly hallmarks that we can point to, including her demeanor on the stand, I suppose. But I've been in court a lot, and people, it's a high pressure situation. You're coached into it. You've been planning this testimony for months, if not years. You know, it's a high pressure situation, and most people come across as kind of weird in those situations anyway, particularly if you're looking at them through a negative lens. So I don't know, but are there hallmarks of both borderline and histrionic? Yeah, in a sense, and it certainly would explain a few things. You know, the other thing I'll add about deluding oneself, or you know, lying and believing your lies, is that, in my experience treating people with borderline long term, is often what will happen, not always, of course, but you know, often enough, where the client will believe that I think something about them, or I even said something to them. It wasn't uncommon for a client to come in and say, "I'm really angry at you for what you said last week, and I've been thinking about it all week, and I'm going to let you have it." And I will say, "Okay, well, you know, what did I say?" And it'll be something that there's no possible way that I said that thing, but to them it felt like I said those things, and thus it was what I said. You know, I might have said something like, okay, well, we don't have time. We'll talk about that next week, so we have to adjourn, you know, something like that. And that can trigger someone's abandonment. It feels, it's a wound that, you know, it's very, very painful. It's overwhelmingly painful, you know, painful emotionally on the level of just being completely abused or abandoned at the age of 18 months. You know, it's like just unbridled pain, but, you know, they're trying to hold it together because they're trying to act like an adult. But the way it feels is, I said something like, "I hate you and I never want to see you again." You know, that's how it felt to them. Yeah. And the feeling is so overwhelming, and the feeling is so big, and the feeling is so all encompassing to all centers of the brain, so to speak, that it literally rewrites the memory to fit how it feels. And then they focus on that throughout the week, and then they come in and you know, I've worked with people where 3 years down the line, they're still convinced I said that thing 3 years ago, and I keep saying, "There's no way I would even think that about you," and you know, I can get them to be 50% convinced of it, but you know, the feelings, we all do this. You know, people with borderline, they just do it to a greater extent, but we all will change our memories based on our feelings. So that's another possible factor in lying or believing something that isn't true.
Yeah. And that's such an interesting point about rewriting memories that, I really want to dig into that. Let me get one question here that's kind of related to what was said earlier about, just know says unstable relationship. Is that why in recordings, Amber has a tendency to say, "I don't feel safe. I don't feel secure"? Or could it be something else from what you know from your experiences?
Could be either. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it could be either. I think, if she has borderline personality disorder, the feelings of abandonment, if you're with someone that's using substances, if their eyes are glossed over or they're passed out when they say that they'll stay awake or whatever it is, like it'll make you feel unsafe and make you feel insecure because you feel alone. You feel like even though the person's there right next to you, they're not actually there. And in instances that can actually make you feel more mad and more angry, because then the person that's activating these emotions in you is present and you can sort of handle the emotions. You're not handling them appropriately, and it's not, you don't want to be getting physically or verbally abusive. It's not an excuse to engage in those behaviors, but the feeling of unsafety and the feeling of insecurity is like, it's so unbearable. And if they're there, then you're going to do something about it. And that's a part that I think really hasn't been brought up enough in this case. Her side has brought up a lot of Johnny was always using substances, and sure, but let's take that a step further. And how could that have activated Amber's feelings of abandonment if this is the case? And it's so common. That's such a huge activation. You want your partner there, and they're there, but they're not really there. If anything, it's
to be actually more present in the moment.
Right. It's like even more activating than if they weren't there at all.
Interesting.
Sometimes.
So that's something that has really stuck out to me. And I think a lot of people watching is that, all these times when he's been so drunk or so high on whatever, that she's taken photos of him kind of passing out. It's a lot of people have been kind of struck by that, to say like, okay, but this is your husband or your boyfriend before that point. Like, he's in a very vulnerable position. And then your decision is to take a photo of him rather than being in kind of a support role to sort of like make sure he's okay. So a lot of people have been kind of turned off by that. Is there some like connection there to that feeling of abandonment, to be like, I feel like I'm being abandoned by this person, so I'm going to, rather than like be in like a nurturing position, I'm just going to take a photo of them from over here? Is there some kind of a connection to that, or am I just making connections that shouldn't be made?
I don't know. I could see a lot of motivations for taking a picture, including the possibilities you mentioned. It's hard to tell. I mean, I could see her, if we're looking at a positive light, thinking, well, often the next day he denies that this happened. So I'm going to take a picture and show him like what condition he was in, because I care about him and I want him to get the help that he needs to get. In a negative light, you could see someone using it as ammunition against them to control them or use against them in a fight. Like, see, or I'm going to, tweet this if you don't, obey me or something. So, I could see a lot of possibilities for why she would take a picture.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I
so
feel like,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to add that it's just interesting and these are all, assumptions and questions that we might have, but the way that Johnny's substance use is being presented in this case, and like with the photos and look at him passed out here and passed out there, it's just, I think the lack of discussing the substance use on Amber's side as well is what's making it feel very confusing to have Johnny's substance use used as such an emphasis for his potential behavior, when there's been so much conversation about Amber's substance use as well. And so I think like that just really plays a role. If you were engaging in the substance use too, then why would you be taking these pictures? Which I think brings to light what Dr. Honda just said about being, possibly positive reasons and possibly negative reasons. And it's very hard to differentiate, because all these other behaviors make it very hard to stay positive, because they just don't make sense to the average and rational person.
Makes sense. And the reason why I ask that is because it's when you have a certain diagnosis that is being talked about in connection with a lot of these behaviors, it can be hard to determine, like, is someone's behavior, connected to their diagnosis, or is it just connected to them being a human being, like what anybody else might do in a certain situation. So here's a good question here from Dwani Prabhu. It says, love this stream. Thank you, Alyte, Dr. Honda, and Dr. Tracy. Question: can childhood abandonment from a nurture lead to complex PTSD instead of BPD or HPD? Now, this is one of the big questions that's been coming up in this trial. We have the difference between Dr. Curry and Dr. Hughes on, her having PTSD versus BPD and histrionic personality disorder. And we can also talk a little bit about the expert witnesses, but kind of relating to rewriting memories, PTSD, and all that kind of trauma stuff. I guess this is a good time to bring up this question.
Yeah. So BPD and HBD are both comorbid, meaning that they often accompany each other, and both of them are often accompanied with complex PTSD or PTSD. There's research and ways of defining these labels such that they will say that people with borderline have all the symptoms of complex PTSD plus others, and all the people with PTSD have and all the people with complex PTSD have all the symptoms of PTSD plus others. So, and some researchers and experts will say, PTSD is a subset of complex PTSD, which is a subset of borderline personality disorder, if that makes any sense. So, so according to some people and theorists, if someone has BPD and HBD, then by definition, they very likely fit criteria for complex PTSD. But other people will say that they're really quite different, and that PTSD and the distress and all the syndromes that come around from avoidance of memory is really quite specific, and certainly someone with BPD can have that, but not necessarily. So, when I hear the testimony, when I heard the testimony from Dr. Curry, I thought, well, yeah, it's possible that she doesn't have PTSD, but I'd be surprised if she didn't have some significant trauma reactivity if you saw borderline that at least could be characterized as at least complex PTSD. So, but I don't know. I'd have to see all the data that they had before them.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense.
I agree with all of that completely. Yeah.
Okay. So let's, I guess, going further into PTSD here, Dr. Honda, you mentioned how, the brain can kind of rewrite memories in all kinds of ways. Not being a psychologist myself, but having some friends who are veterans coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq and things like that. There are all kinds of ways that I understand people can, that the brain can sort of protect itself from trauma by either blacking out memories or changing memories over time, and not even related to trauma, I guess. I'm very, very fascinated with the brain and the way that it works. And, why do we do what we do is kind of like one of those big questions that I absolutely love trying to figure out in various ways. So in this kind of a case, obviously there's a lot of risks with putting on any kind of a witness because memories can be reshaped over time. Is there anything that you've seen here that you could kind of point to that's like, makes you think that maybe there's a memory that's been, I don't know if, I know that no one's a magician or a wizard, but like maybe a memory has been rewritten in this case in a certain respect, either having to do with PTSD or having to do with any of these other disorders, or just having a human brain. I don't know if that's kind of a vague question.
Dr. Tracy?
A lot comes up for me. Memory, somebody can be in a car accident and somebody can say, oh, that accident wasn't that bad. One I had before was worse. So that's their subjective experience. And somebody can say, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. So that's just, a great layman's explanation of like everybody perceives things differently. In the case we've heard audio of Amber saying, I didn't punch you, I hit you. Emphasizing that there's a difference. And then that's her subjective experience, but she's saying it sort of in an objective way. And Johnny's experience was probably different. His response was something like, don't tell me what it feels like to be punched. And so that already implies that our subjective experience, the lens through which we see the world, affects our memories. And that's not even traumatic memories. That's just memories in general. And when it comes to trauma, when we're integrating memories into our brain, it gets deciphered into many different pieces. What we saw, what we smelled, what we felt. And so when we're traumatized, our brain starts functioning in a different way. Those memories get categorized in different ways. Some aspects of that memory disappear. Some aspects of that memory are infused with emotion. Some aspects of those memories are really amplified and may appear to be more intense than the way that they actually were. So any eyewitness testimony or any memory at all to a degree that isn't photographed or videoed and looked at objectively is going to be different for every person.
Yeah. Dr. Honda, anything to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that as a couple therapist, it is universal that couples, regardless of where they are on the spectrum in terms of emotional reactivity or abandonment traumas or relational traumas in general, will have different stories to tell me about a conflict that they recently had. And I've just learned that everyone, including myself, when I get into a high emotional situation or even a moderate one, I am going to forget memories that don't agree with my narcissistic narrative, and will amplify or even possibly invent memories that support my self-centered narrative. And everyone does that in a fight. You said this. No, I didn't. I never said. What are you talking about? You did. You said it. And so I have a whole spiel when I talk with couples about this in therapy that essentially is like, look, you probably are both wrong and you're probably a little right. So, at least you can say that's what the other person remembers. And so let's just go with that. You don't have to admit you did it, but your partner believes you said that. So, let's just go along with it. You're not admitting, you don't have to flog yourself because of this, but let's just put aside this false notion that somehow we're going to be able to cobble together your stories and discover the truth, because it's just not going to happen. And so when I watch this trial, it's obviously a very, famous or, I don't know, newsworthy experience of this, but it's very mundane. I mean, I've treated couples like this, and I just see a couple that was in desperate need of a couple therapists. They went to that couple therapists like 4 times or something, Dr. Anderson, and it's like, and it sounded like it was sporadic and it was random over a number of months, and I'm just like, you missed an opportunity there as a couple to really dedicate yourself to an hour every week, because it could have helped.
Yeah. Now, one thing that came up in through Dr. Anderson, and I know that this became a buzzword that's been sort of tossed around a bunch of times, and a lot of people that are DV survivors particularly don't like it. The term mutual abuse was brought up through Dr. Anderson. Do you guys have any thoughts on the use of that term, whether it's appropriate or inappropriate, or sort of like how you would, if it's inappropriate, how you would prefer it to be referred to, basically?
It's a well-known phenomenon in the research literature on intimate partner violence. It's been around for decades. I understand people's reticence to using the term, because if you use it unwisely, you can absolutely blame the victim and perpetuate the abuse that's happening to the victim. Just because a victim occasionally defends themselves or freaks out and has a violent outburst once a year or something, that usually, if in that characterization, we wouldn't label that as mutual abuse. We'd say that person just had a temporary violent moment in the midst of an overall systemic abuse, gaslighting experience that person is going through. But yeah, it's well known. In the clinical literature, we might call it bidirectional intimate partner violence, and it's so there's 2 different categories. There's one where you just have violence, where Dr. Hughes actually talked about this, where people will have non-abusive violence, and it's not a good thing that they're violent with each other, but it's not infused with a message of control and you must obey me and I'm punishing you for something you did and you better watch out, of intimidation. But the other type of bidirectional intimate partner violence, it does have control and intimidation and coercion in it. And it's hard to imagine unless you've seen it, because we don't often acknowledge this in our society, which is why there's a lot of misconceptions among the public. But they will alternate between control and you must obey me. It's, it can be like 1 week on, 1 week off, or it could literally happen in the same conversation. I've seen it in my office where they both come from abusive families, and it's just the way that they deal with attachments, and it's very normalized. They normalize it to each other and it's almost like the victim in that moment will say, oh, well, okay, now it's my turn. It's almost like now I get my justice because I was a jerk face earlier and I deserve it, and they'll go back and forth. And it's hard to identify, because again, for me, when I see that sort of thing, I'm like, I'm always saying, I'm going to assume one person is more the abuser until I'm proven otherwise, because I don't want to blame the victim. You know what I mean? So I'm always really trying to dig down on exactly how often does this happen? How do you feel? Because the other thing is like, if the victim strikes back, the abuser might succumb, but they actually don't feel unsafe. They're just like, oh, I'll get you later, So it can look very abusive, but we have to know how the victim is feeling on the inside. And
I see.
Oftentimes that can be hard to get at. So it takes a while.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was just going to emphasize like intensity, the intention of the person that's enacting it, the feeling that the victim or the person receiving the abuse is getting, and the frequency, the intention, the intensity, all of that matters. And I really like what you said, Dr. Honda, about we have to be careful to not be blaming the victim and just assume mutual abuse, even if both parties have been abusive. There's so much nuance in it. It really depends on the initiation of the violence and then what that has become in the totality of the relationship.
It's so interesting to hear that, because coming from a lawyer's perspective, it's like, especially whether or not someone is the abuser, or whether or not someone has been abused is really a legal question here. It's a very different sort of definition of the term abuse that's being used in a different kind of setting. And I think that that's kind of where one of these sort of disconnects is happening, is that in a clinical setting, where people are going to a couples therapist, the term abuse or mutual abuse might have a different meaning than what it has in a trial or in a court setting, basically. So thank you for clarifying that for me.
Well, can I ask you a question along those lines?
Absolutely.
I asked you this before during one of your other live streams and your team, so given what I just said, because I wasn't able to really explain that, in your opinion, could it be argued that, okay, fine, the Amber Heard legal team or even the jury might see it this way, that, okay, fine, Amber Heard was abusive, or there's a lot of evidence saying that Amber Heard was abusive, but we don't have enough evidence to demonstrate that Johnny Depp also wasn't occasionally abusive in terms of what happened. Because I think the misunderstanding that if somehow Amber Heard was abusive, that negates the possibility of Johnny Depp being abusive, which of course, what I just said isn't necessarily true. So even though there's all this evidence and maybe swaying the jury that Amber Heard was abusive and maybe lying about things, might it still be legally valid to claim that she was not defaming Johnny Depp when she stated publicly that she had been abused? She just left out possibly her side of the abuse. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it depends. It depends on really how the jury ends up picking this up, because if this were a normal DV case, there would be specific definitions for these various actions that came into play to say, is this domestic violence? Is this abuse? It would have a very specific definition that would be used. But because it's a defamation case, we're not using the same jury instructions that we would during a DV case. So it kind of is going to be up to interpretation by the jury, which is one of those like huge wild cards in this case. So absolutely, like they could say, well, technically, if he hit her once, or if his words were considered enough to be abusive words, then yeah, technically she didn't lie. On the other hand, the jury could also look at it and say, well, she maybe didn't outright lie, but she was very misleading in the way that she wrote it, by suggesting that she was like a 100% victim that was being, like dragged throughout her whole marriage. And, and this idea of sexual violence is in the title. So, if they think that didn't actually happen, then it's like, okay, there's enough here that was misleading enough that we should say that it's a lie. Because, in the law, you have there are different forms of lies, right? There's a lie by a statement that you make that is untrue, or you can lie by implication, by omitting certain facts that would help to, kind of round out the picture to make things look a little bit more accurate. So that's, all of that comes into play into how the jury is going to be interpreting these various sort of components to this whole defamation claim. So, and that's one of the things that makes this very much a gray area for this particular case.
Interesting.
So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So here's a question from Because That's How You Get Ants. That's a funny name. Says, as someone diagnosed with PTSD from a car accident, PTSD from childhood trauma, and a parent with borderline, my understanding there is overlap between all three, especially PTSD and borderline, which can lead to misdiagnosis. Thoughts, possible rebuttal. So what are your guys' thoughts on that kind of situation? Could there be an overlap, and could that have possibly influenced the ways that they were diagnosed by, or that I guess Amber was diagnosed by Dr. Curry and Dr. Hughes?
Dr. Tracy?
Yeah, I'm looking at it, and I feel like we kind of got into this a little bit, like talking about borderline, PTSD, and PTSD.
Yeah.
Obviously, both of the psychologists came up with different diagnoses for Amber based off of the tests that they did. I think where I'm confused is possible rebuttal. I guess I think answering.
Oh, sorry. I think that part is asking about the part in trial when Johnny has a chance to put up some witnesses for a rebuttal. So is that something that could come up possibly in a rebuttal? I think is how I'm interpreting that.
It could, but there wouldn't be standing because, as I was saying earlier, according to some evaluators and researchers, a complex PTSD and borderline are separate things that can be comorbid, but can exist in are different things. They're related, and whereas others, like I said, will actually say complex PTSD is a part of borderline personality disorder.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the expert witnesses here. I know that we've got like less than 10 minutes, so I want to try to hit some of this stuff. But here's an interesting question from Casey. Why did Amber only use Zoom call with Dr. Hughes but visited with Dr. Curry in person? Is there a preference between the two? Basically, is there any reason that you would have to think that like having these conversations by Zoom versus in person could impact the way that someone would ultimately diagnose a patient coming in the door?
What's coming up for me is, we're still dealing with ramifications of the pandemic. So it might've just been the psychologist's preference of initiating a session. But if I think about the differences that could occur diagnosing or assessing somebody in person versus through Zoom, nonverbal body language makes a huge difference. Being able to see the person's entire body. Are they tapping their feet? Are they crossing their legs? Are they, you can get so much more of an assessment on somebody, being able to actually look at their mental status and how that's being presented in their body if you are in person.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know that. I didn't know that Dr. Hughes only used Zoom the entire time. She never met in person with Amber?
I don't know if it was the entire time, but this is, I need to look back at my notes, to be honest, because I missed this detail myself.
Yeah.
So.
Could it affect an evaluation? Absolutely. In the ways that Dr. Tracy said. Would it make it invalid, or would I not believe someone's evaluation? No. Particularly how much time Dr. Hughes spent with her and how many instruments she used.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Thanks. I didn't know if you'd catch that. Since we're on the topic of this, I have to say, as I was watching Dr. Hughes' discussion while she was on the stand, I think that the gender pronouns that she used when describing the victims or the perpetrators, I was like literally cringing watching it. I kept shutting it, like, I can't watch this. Then I'd open it up again because I'm like, but there's like millions of people watching this. I need to watch this and see what's going on. It didn't appear that she was capable of being objective. Those were very clear indications that she had more of a perspective that women were victims and men were perpetrators, and it really was a bad look professionally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Agreed.
that was another thing that came up, and I'm glad that you brought that up too. Yeah, I've seen some critique of that. Do you think that that is an indication for you that she is more biased, or do you think that maybe that's just sort of the way that she's sort of like directed her conclusions to sort of help the overall legal team here? Or I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I mean, I think, you know, you could say that either one is the case. You could say that maybe she's very research based and most of the research was based on women being victims. You know, there's so many explanations that we could possibly give, but how long she spoke, and even when she was asked towards the end, can't men be victims also? And she said, yes, of course, we need to be very careful to not be biased when we're making our presentations, after giving like an hours long presentation that was filled with bias just simply on the pronouns that she was using. And so I think if her intention, even at least on the stand, was to be non-biased, she didn't do a very good job at that.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad Dr. Tracy had a similar experience, because I actually did a reaction video, and I didn't know anyone's reaction to it, and I'm watching it and I'm just like, oh, I actually cut out a lot of my reaction because I was like, I mean, this is embarrassing how like much I'm like cringing, and because she's a super expert in this. So to address your question, Alyte, is that at first I thought, oh, she just made a mistake. You know, she just said her, and I thought she'll never do that again. And she proceeded to do that, throughout the thing. And I thought, well, she's a super expert. She knows better. So, and some lawyers actually have been reaching out to me and giving me like, behind the scenes look, not on this case, but others, saying that she absolutely knows what she's doing. She was coached to do this. It was absolutely a strategy to sway the jury. Because, even when, she was asked about, can men be victims? She's like, absolutely, coaches, Boy Scout troop leaders, gay marriages. Right. Absolutely. And I'm like, really?
But what about straight, right, relationships, heterosexual relationships?
Danced around that. And, no rational expert in this field would word it that way. But I will tell you that in my travels with colleagues, there are people that believe that. They'll pander to the notion that men can be victims by women abusers, but I don't think they actually believe it in their soul.
Wow.
And I've been a student in classes like that, and I didn't say anything because I didn't have any power. But I've they'll say, well, yeah, of course men could be victims, but let's just refer to the perpetrator as men and as the victim as, because it's just easier that way. And I'm like, do we have to? And so could she be massively biased? Maybe. I would like to think not, given how much of an expert she is, though.
Yeah. Very much so. Go ahead.
Sorry. Something else I want to say is I've seen, as somebody that has borderline personality disorder, I've seen a lot of the community come out and say, of course, a woman that is expressing these behaviors would be diagnosed with this disorder. Like, she definitely doesn't have it. This is such a way to make women look crazy and make women look awful. And sure, there's probably some people, of course, because of the stigma, that are going to jump on that. But I also think that it can actually be damaging to somebody that is presenting with these specific symptoms to not give them the diagnosis simply because it's a stigmatized diagnosis. Because then people who actually do have it and experience it can get the treatment that they need and understand themselves and what's really going on with them. And I think I just needed to make that statement, because I get it. People find out I'm a therapist with borderline, and if they're, stuck in their opinions, then they're not going to listen to anything I have to say. And they're going to make all these assumptions up about me. And honestly, how I was in the past, I wouldn't hold it against them, but people can change. And I think that's one of the major things to recognize and realize. It's difficult, especially because we're told, I don't want to treat you. And no, you don't really have that, because that would be awful if you did. And it's like, actually, what would be awful is if you did, and then you weren't told that you did, and then you didn't get the actual help that you needed.
100%. Absolutely. And I think also, like, I think it's also very inspiring for a lot of people that have BPD or that know someone with BPD or that are just learning about BPD to have someone like you, Dr. Tracy, talking about it openly and saying like, hey, this is how I was presenting myself. I have gone through a lot and I have, changed, and this is where I am now. It shows that it's possible, it's possible. And I know that there's a lot of, a lot of angry feelings, of course, towards Amber Heard. There's a lot of hatred going her way as well. But I think that there are also a lot of people out there that really just hope that she can get the help that she needs, assuming, of course, that she does have BPD, assuming that is the case. So I think that also is very, very inspiring for you to have, come forward like that as well. So I guess one final question, because we're already at an hour. I knew this was going to happen. I knew that we would have so much more to talk about at the end of an hour. But hopefully I can have you guys back at some point so we can have more discussion on a lot of these topics, because I see that there's a bunch of people that have asked a lot of questions that we won't be able to get to before you guys have to leave. But Hansley Bashor says, Curry and Hughes have given her different diagnoses. How can we trust mental health experts to diagnose this correctly? So I think that also kind of gets into the difference between expert testimony and, and psychotherapists in a clinical environment. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, it's disconcerting. I'm trained as a forensic psychologist, so but I haven't done it in a long time, and I'm reminded watching this trial some of the reasons why I didn't want to do this, and this is one of them, which is that not only do you have to come down hard with a very firm opinion about something that I know better than to say a firm opinion about anything about human beings, because these are constructions. It's based on my own opinion and how I look at particularly personality disorders, but often we are subconsciously or consciously motivated to try to get money, because that's why we're doing this job, because we get paid to please whoever is hiring us. And and then people watching this are just like, wow, I mean, diagnosing is just a big sham. I mean, look at those two people. They both claim, and they've both used scientific instruments. And yeah, I mean, it's a highlighting of what I'm just going to call the corruption of that industry. I have close friends who do this kind of work, and they're not bad people. I would like to think they're not corrupt, but when you just look at what happened, and it's so common in courts for this to happen, that why is this happening? Is it just random that the Johnny Depp team forensic psychologist found data to back up their claim? Is that just circumstances? That's completely just by chance? And it's just like, how could that possibly be by chance? And so there's that, which I will echo people's concern about that. And two is, when you're, as you're saying, Alyte, when we're working in the clinical environment, we're not really in a situation where we're trying to prove a point. We're trying to help someone. And so if, for example, we misdiagnose someone, well, we have time to kind of iron that out, and we will check in with the client over time. Like, does this still make sense in terms of how I'm conceptualizing you? And we can adjust over time, and ethical, competent clinicians will take the time and recognize that at any given time, they're just cobbling together a bunch of different reports, maybe even some instruments that they've administered, to develop a workable model in terms of what's going on with this person, so you can actually, tailor treatment to them. But you're never saying scientifically they have this, in the same way that you would diagnose a broken bone, because you can see it under X-ray. There's no, ability to do that in psychology. So in terms of like, might misdiagnosis happen? Yeah, because of a lot of reasons. But, like I said, competent clinicians will put in the effort to try to figure out how to help someone and find the label that makes sense. Anyway.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. Humans are very complex. There's lots of aspects of not only how our brain functions, but also how our subjective mind functions, and the psychology that actually goes on between who we are and how we behave. And yeah, I like that the differences were explained between like a forensic setting and a clinical setting. Forensic, you are chosen on one side to do an evaluation, and it's really unfortunate that we at least had some pretty clear evidence of bias just based in the language that was used on one side. And then, in a clinical setting, there's just a lot more time. It isn't like I need to have this diagnosis set for you for this court case, and there's room to reevaluate over time, because oftentimes when people start therapy, they aren't coming in with the full presentation of their symptomatology. You get to know the person over time and make adjustments as needed based on the, what caused the symptoms, how the symptoms change over time. And we need that time, sometimes 6 months to a year, to really take a look at, are these behaviors persistent? Are they out of context or out of proportion? And how intense are they, and how often do they occur?
Right. Just a small asterisk to that. For example, I don't diagnose someone with any personality disorder until 3 to 6 months into treating them once a week. Yeah. So I might have strong hypotheses in the first session, but I would never officially diagnose them, even in my records, of a personality disorder until I had a lot more time.
Yeah, something I want to add too is just therapists use insurance, and that's something I would just kind of want to put out there to the public is, in order for your insurance to be charged, even in the first session, there will be a diagnosis that needs to be placed, because that's the unfortunate way our system works now. Okay. If you have issues ever of what that diagnosis is, or if you aren't told what that diagnosis is, please make sure that the clinician that you're working with is informing you of what's being put on your medical record, explaining to you why it's being put there. And anytime there's ever a difference or change in that diagnosis, that you're aware of that. Because I've seen that happen a lot, where things are placed onto somebody's medical record and they're actually being treated for something that they may have no idea they've been diagnosed with, whether on a legal or medical record or just diagnosed in the treatment plan.
Interesting. Okay. I never would have seen it from that angle. So I thank you. And thank you both for this really great conversation. I would love to have you both back, throughout the trial, if you want to come in and join the panel and comment. I know Dr. Honda, you've already popped in a couple times. Dr. Tracy, you're more than welcome to come back as well. And if you guys would like to also do a part 2 of this discussion, I know there are a lot of questions that people still have that we haven't gotten to today. I would love to have you both back at some point as well.
That'd be great.
So awesome. Okay, well, I can let you both go, and I will continue going through some of these super chats. So if you have places that you've got to be, I know we've gone a little bit over an hour. So you guys are more than welcome to head on out if you need to, or otherwise you're welcome to stick around as well. But I imagine you both have stuff on your schedules from what you've mentioned.
Yeah, I've got more trial to watch, actually.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And Dr. Honda, it was great to meet you. And thank you so much for having me on. I'd love to come on again. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Of course. You're both more than welcome.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you, guys. All right. And I'm not by myself, because I've got Rick Hoke here, who just popped in.
I was told we were doing super chats. I was following.
Yeah. Thanks for joining in. So this was, did you catch that conversation that I just had?
I did.
All right.
The bulk of it.
Yeah.
I was trying.
I know you were finishing up your stream earlier.
I was trying to send people over here, and YouTube switches didn't work for me, and I apologize.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, that was such a fascinating conversation. I'm so Thankful for Dr. Tracy and Dr. Honda for coming in and talking. And I really hope that they both come back for sure. But anyhow, I guess we should go through some of these super chats. Hopefully based on the discussion that we just had, I'm in a position to be able to answer some more of these. But if not, I'm going to try to take a note of these and then maybe reserve them for a part 2 discussion with them.
Yeah.
That might be helpful. So otherwise, let's jump into it. All right. Almera S. Oh, actually, before I bring up this one, there was one that I couldn't capture because it came in too early. That came in from somebody that I want to make sure I mention. Secret Me says, is it science to do a psychological evaluation on an accuser after they're told you will make a, and then it says $, devastating diagnosis? What's this? What's the MMPI research? Would you recuse and why? So MMPI research, that we did not discuss, so I can't respond to that one. But is it science to do a psychological evaluation on an accuser after they're told you will make a devastating diagnosis? So you'll make money doing it, I guess, is the implication. So I don't know about that one. I mean, it sounds like like that's a bit more of an accusatory question rather than than an informational question, right? So, but I mean, I understand the meaning behind it, that, you know, there's definitely potential for bias if you're evaluating someone after you know that there's already an accusation on the table, and you could end up sort of succumbing to confirmation bias, which of course anyone is susceptible to.
Yep.
So yeah, so there's that. Thank you, Secret Me. Then Elmera asks, why is Whitney allowed to testify? She didn't finish her deposition. How is Ellen Barkin involved? Well, we don't know what sort of conversations were had with the judge between the two sides, but my guess is that there probably was some sort of an agreement that was entered between the two sides, or the judge just said that she can testify to what she already testified to by deposition. Maybe, I don't know. This judge is going to try to be as fair as possible to both sides, I think.
Are we buying this reporting then? Is that our official position?
What's that?
We're buying this reporting?
I think I have seen that both Whitney and Ellen Barkin are going to be testifying or are expected to testify next. So
okay. Yeah, I saw the leak of that. I mean, the leak from Law and Crime Network was Ellen Barkin, Whitney, and Johnny Depp to be called hostile. The one thing that I said about that was it's hard for me to imagine a stipulation agreement where the Depp team agrees not to call Heard, but doesn't correlate a request to not call Depp as hostile on their side. So I don't know. I'm sitting here watching things unfold. I just don't know how much I buy out of reporting on this. So we'll see.
In that one in particular, I'm wondering what they would get out of him that they didn't have an opportunity to ask him during cross-examination, because that should be a question that the judge would have asked in that case, to be like, okay, you want to recall him in your case in chief now. However, you've already had a bite at the apple there. You've already had a chance to ask him a bunch of questions, and you've only had like 2 witnesses or several, like 3, 4 or 5 witnesses since him, you know, that there have been some experts. Essentially, that's all we've heard from since him.
Right.
Essentially. So, you know, I'm a little bit skeptical on that one as well. But as for Whitney and Ellen Barkin is apparently a former girlfriend from a long time ago. She testified in the UK trial about how Johnny threw some things in a hotel room, but I don't believe there's been any testimony about him actually hitting her. So there's that. But a lot of people have characterized her as a woman scorned.
Well, it seems that Whitney would be able to be an extrinsic witness for some of the things Amber has said. It doesn't sound like Ellen Barkin would be. It would be more of a kind of character type evidence. I need extrinsics. I need confirmation of things happening in Amber Heard's story. So I don't know that Ellen Barkin would really move that needle for me. Right.
Just No says, review Dr. H bottle test to AH test. They are different. How do the contradictions affect evaluations, or would you have to redo? Oh, that is a bit more of a question for them. Yeah. Yep. No, that's one that I don't think that I can answer. I'm sorry. Miles Peckover says, hi all. It seems like there is a lot going on in this case. Regardless of Miss Heard's diagnostic status, how can the public educate themselves about personality disorders? Well, I think one great way is going over to Psychology in Seattle and the Truth Doctor show and subscribing to them, checking them out, because they've got a lot of really great information on their channels where they are talking about this case, talking about BPD and histrionic and all of the other stuff that's kind of been coming up in this case. So that is one good way for people to sort of educate themselves, and especially seeing from Dr. Courtney Tracy about not just her experiences as a clinician, but also as someone who has BPD, who has sort of been through the ringer, so to speak, and been through what a lot of, I guess, Amber has been showing. So that's absolutely fascinating. So be sure to check them out there. Busha says, what is the use of Seroquel? AH was given a dose. So Seroquel, I can't remember. That's a drug for BPD, I think. But I can't remember exactly what it does or how it helps. That is
Wikipedia calls it an antipsychotic, but it's Wikipedia.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Simon Tupper says, is it possible that Depp, ADHD, and Amber, HPD, is at the core of their incompatibility in the long term, but deeply passionate in the short term? I would think so. I mean, it sounds like, I mean, especially with his tendency to seek avoidance, right? That sounds a bit more characteristic of Johnny. I mean, I know he's been diagnosed with ADHD as well, but that's sort of the way that he sort of copes with a lot of these big arguments. Is he needs to get away, he needs to sort of like regroup a bit, and then whereas with Amber, more so with BPD rather than HPD, I think, well, I guess the two of them combined, I suppose, but basically like feeling abandoned in those kinds of moments when someone sort of leaves like that. That does seem like a pretty core incompatibility between those two types of people, especially if they don't understand why the other person is doing what they're doing and why they themselves are doing what they're doing. Zach Frisch says, what is the difference between DBT and CBT, or is one a subset of the other? Ooh, that one is for sure not a question for me. I wish that we could get more time with these folks, and I'm going to try to have them back for a part 2, guys. But this is one question that I think will definitely be one that will be added to the list. Okay. Mr. Yasminok says, what do you think of the claim that BPD diagnoses are weaponized against women, and specifically to not believe or minimize the experiences of women with a BPD diagnosis? I'm glad you asked this one. Dr. Tracy actually addressed this herself earlier, that she says, you know, on the one hand, it's understandable to have that perspective because you can see a lot of women being diagnosed with these things, you know, or there's been, I suppose, even a history of women being diagnosed for being more emotional, being more erratic, or you know, in various ways. There's sort of some stigmas or some stereotypes around being female that has had that come up in the past. However, at the same time, you know, you don't want to just assume that someone that is presenting certain behaviors just automatically is not going to be someone that has BPD, because what if they actually have it and they need an explanation for what they're doing and why they're doing it, and you know, and in ways that they can change their behaviors in various ways, and seeing how it's being harmful to themselves and others. You know, like there are also plenty of reasons for why you would want an accurate diagnosis for a lot of these people. That was such a great point that she made. K Zuka or X Zuka X says, if you had to do an audio only evaluation, or say the JDAH trial was audio only, how would that impact your typical investigation methods, or would you still be able to make reasonable determinations?
It's a great question. I find that to be a great question. I would love it answered.
I know. Yep. It's, I mean, all of these are going to be saved and taken down. But it's such a great question. So I definitely want to have a part 2. I'm probably going to say that about 20 times through the rest of the stream. You know, Kizo says, do you think that Amber could have been self-medicated with MDMA? I've heard that MDMA may improve therapy, especially with BPD. That is so fascinating, as well. Yeah, I did see that there was another question in the chat about like use of drugs and how that can impact a lot of these other disorders and whatnot. So such a great question. Circa 1990 says, thoughts on Johnny having an avoidant attachment and Amber having an insecure attachment, BPD. Could she have NPD? Oh, we didn't even get into narcissism because that's something that hasn't really come up as a diagnosis from any of the doctors that are testifying in this case, but people have brought it up. And so that was one thing that I had wanted to touch on. An hour just isn't enough. So but I do think that it's such an interesting sort of mix between these two, with having, you know, this characteristic of avoidance versus the characteristic of, you know, insecurity and that kind of attachment. Is really, really interesting. It's such an interesting dynamic here. And I think that is also very unfortunate for how we got here in this trial. Kate did it. Says, Dr. Kirk and Dr. Tracy, how important is it that Dr. Hughes didn't fill out that box / follow the instructions of the assessment? That's another one that I had wanted to get to in talking about the expert witnesses. So this is one that for sure will be brought up again if we get a chance. Objectionable Law, Ashley D. Harrison says, I still feel like OCPD wasn't discussed. I feel like this is way too common in the psychology world. OCPD. Yeah. I mean, they mentioned it as part of one of the clusters, but didn't get into it too much. And I don't know if there's anything in this case that could bring up a possible diagnosis, but for sure. Christine Venner says, many have rough childhoods, but not all get cluster B/C. What else is needed to generate these? My answer to that, not being a psychologist, is probably having to do with something about the fact that the brain reacts in funny ways. I mean, you can have a bunch of people that go to war and not everyone comes back with PTSD, or at least not necessarily with the same levels of PTSD, even if they've seen all kinds of crazy stuff. So that's my guess would be it probably has something to do with that the brain just reacts differently in different environments and to different sort of experiences. But that would be an interesting question to ask them as well. Larry says, how can I help a person with BPD and narcissistic? That is also a great question. I was actually looking for this one at the very end to see if I could find it, because I saw it come in, because that I think would be very helpful for people to find out. I mean, I've gotten so many messages from people saying like, I've been through this experience as the other partner in the relationship that doesn't have BPD, but I went through XYZ because of it, and didn't know how to handle it, and so now I'm out of that relationship and things are better for me. But I mean, yeah, how to help someone that's in it, because obviously this is somebody who carries it with them for the rest of their lives. So Dr. T, have you written a book? Oh, I would like to know that too. I would like to know if she's written a book. Thank you for that. Luis Florence, diagnosis with BPD and experienced being locked up in a psych ward because some intern read my history and assumed that I was psychotic when actually it was an MS flare-up. I feel as stigma is getting worse. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Luis, I'm really sorry to hear that you went through that.
Yeah.
I hope that you didn't have any like long-lasting effects because of that. Beyond that, but obviously like the fact that you even went through that at all, I think is terrible. And I'm sorry that you went through that. I mean, it sounds like based on the conversation that we had today that there are stigmas even within the industry, even within the psychology world. So hopefully that can change over time though. Leon Holmer says, would the negative attention Amber Heard is receiving right now in any way satisfying to someone with HPD, or must the attention be positive? Interesting. That's a very interesting question, because does it matter to someone with HPD if the attention that they're getting is positive or negative? I don't know. That's such a fascinating question. CG says, does physical beauty allow someone to get away with these behaviors longer than would normally be tolerated by others? I feel like that probably could be true. Rick, you're adding something here. What do we got here?
So I just went and looked at her website. It doesn't look like she has a book, but she does have what she calls a card deck, which she describes as a card-based experience that guides conversations about mental health disorders. So I don't know what the questioner was asking for specifically, but this does appear to be at least something that she developed and worked on for that kind of thing.
Amazing. Can you put the link to that page in the private chat, and then we'll get it in the chat and in the description?
I would be happy to,
because I think that is awesome. I love the idea of having a card game that basically is like a way for opening up discussion. Oh, that's incredible. All right, cool. Let me copy that, and then I'll toss it in the chat here, and then we'll get that in the description as well. So does physical beauty allow for some women to get away with these behaviors longer
does
than
attractiveness get you some loopholes? I think
probably.
I think that goes across genders. I have to be honest.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it also goes across like not just these kinds of situations with relationships, but people that are attractive can often get away with a lot of things throughout life. regardless of if it's a BPD kind of scenario or HPD or any of these other personality disorders, mental health issues, at all.
That's my intuitive experience, not my professional
of course.
expertise. But
yeah, just looking at this as a human being, right? Satu Toivonen says, AH in the infamous Australia tape said, all I was popping was Xanax, Adderall, ecstasy, and hallucinogens. How would that affect someone with BPD? That's another
man. Me listening to this audio tape at some point after the trial is really going to be something.
Yeah, I think so. New Star One says AH enjoying attention trumps possible consequences. Could be.
I was trying to figure out how ex-President Trump fit into that question, Alyte.
That when I first saw it come in, that's what I thought too. I was like, "Is this about okay?" But no, the verb.
All right. I'm doing a lot of help here, as you can see. I found a card game.
No, but this is great. This is great. Even still, having someone to occasionally, thumbs up also helps. Z Seltzer says, "What about the PTSD and Dr. Hughes? We did talk about that a bit." Deborah D says, concerns due to experience with X. Doesn't Amber Heard diagnosis become with dramatic show of self-harm, suicide attempt, or for attention or vengeance if things turn out badly for her, i.e., you're going to be sorry when I hurt myself? Oh, yeah, we didn't even get into that aspect of either BPD or histrionic. That might be more histrionic than BPD. Well, I guess they both are comorbid according to Dr. Honda. But that kind of sort of situation, I would be concerned, and I sincerely hope that nothing like that happens.
Absolutely. I do think Dr. Curry mentioned something like that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now that you mentioned that, I think you're right. Kamari says doctors thought on the couple's therapist testimony. So they did talk about that a little bit. Ezekiel Crow, would a cross bring out self-awareness? So from what it sounds like, from what Dr. Tracy was saying, she having been on the stand, she says that she was on the stand and she lied in her testimony, as that was just part of her sort of symptoms sort of coming out. My guess is that the self-awareness would probably not come out on cross, but probably through a lot of work later on down the road. From what it sounds like, she has put in a lot of work to get to where she is now. So something like a single cross-examination, I'm skeptical of that, but I would be happy to hear any kind of correction from anyone on that one. Ladybug 82SW says, is there any way to turn on CC? Oh, closed captionings.
I don't think YouTube does that live. Do they?
Although we are able to get it from the live streams that we do from the courtroom. I'm going to look into that. I apologize because I know that there are a lot of people that are watching that are from an international community, a lot of languages that people speak. So I'm going to try to look into that some more before we get to trial day 16 on Monday, for sure. But thank you for that. Kiki May says, with a fear of abandonment, do you see BPD in a lot of adopted children or single parent homes? Oh, that is so interesting. I would love to ask them that as well.
Yeah, you've got a lot of great questions here. You got enough for like an 8-hour show.
I really do. Pal Harp says, some people are just horrible. Nothing to do with being nuts. Just a horrible person. Simple. Some people are bad people. That is also true. Diane Sanchez's question, is this why she says in a recording something like, when you go to the other room rather than leave, you almost make it worse? That sounds like it. I mean, Dr. Tracy was saying that, sometimes it's almost even worse for someone with BPD to see their partner being physically there, but sort of mentally checked out in someplace else, or being like completely passed out drunk or something like that. Sometimes it feels worse just being someone with BPD, which was so fascinating to me that could be considered worse than just not even physically being there. Maureen Smith, thank you. Angela's Amusements says, but what if he's doing the drugs and alcohol because she is so demanding? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Yeah, that's another point. I think that, but just coming from the perspective of the person that has BPD, the explanation is that is just subjectively how that sort of situation feels. Now, we can have our own opinions objectively as sort of third parties looking at the overall interaction between the two, and to say, someone feeling subjectively one way isn't exactly reasonable, because they still have to be operating in a human's world with other human beings, and having normal relationships with people. So I completely understand what you're saying here. Leolia says she's anxiously attached with fear of abandonment. He's avoidant. It's a push-pull dynamic that hurts both. I would, yeah, that does sound correct. Emma Rain says, TTD, I'm glad that you exist. I am too. I'm very glad that you exist, TTD. Stacy B, thank you. Stephanie Corbett says, what effect can high drug use have on BPD, HPD? This is definitely a question, like a line of questions, I should say, that I would like to ask them if I can have them back at some point. Sally Barlow says, do you have any concerns about AH this week? She's backed into a corner and the tide of public approval seems to have turned. That is also a very good question.
The interesting thing there is that she can tell that to some extent. You know, we talk about the jury trying to be hidden, and Amber Heard's, that's why she fired her PR team, one presumes, right?
Yeah, right. Well,
so,
I mean, you fire someone because you're not happy with the results that you're getting from them, usually, right?
I mean, usually, yeah. There's a number of reasons to fire somebody, but yeah, it appears here that she wasn't happy with it. They do appear to be taking a more aggressive tact based on their public relations response, based on some of the articles we're seeing. But yeah, she is. It's a great question. It's a great point. She is being able to observe this for 10 days, and that even mainstream media, while still kind of going in both directions, there's a lot more out there that's suggestive of at least not just straight up believing her testimony than if I were in her shoes, I probably would have been anticipating. So that's a fascinating aspect of this 10-day break to me, is what does she come back looking like?
Yeah, that's a really good point too. Very well put. Alicia Peterson says, I find her evil, plotting this for 4 years.
I think evil's in play.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. Spo Oki says, I have BPD and I love your input, Dr. Tracy. Fantastic. No, I'm so happy that she came on. Brandon Lesko says, what do you think about AH lying so much on the PTSD questionnaire? The questions she is tripping a wire on are to the effect of, have you ever wanted to hurt someone? Not have you? The answer is yes. No equals defensive. Also a very interesting question, I think, to be put to both of these experts. But also, you know, the use of the word lying is, of course, coming from a little bit of a conclusion there. I will note that, because she could be lying on the questionnaire, or she might be thinking that she's being honest on that questionnaire. I mean, from what they were saying, that it is possible in a situation like this that she actually has rewritten her memories, or that her brain has rewritten her memories, because of the various things that she's gone through and the diagnoses that she has, or just being a human being. Meryl Vandenherk says, they said bipolar type 1 for JD, right? I'm not sure if he has bipolar, let alone type 1. If he really has bipolar, wouldn't 2 be more likely? Thoughts? Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's 100% more a question for them than for me. But I'm going to be adding that one to the list for sure. Automated Woodworker says, can the diagnosis be used as an excuse in court? I would say no. I will just say this as an attorney, I would say no, although we don't know exactly how the jury is going to be interpreting it. So, you know, they could interpret it in a way to say, well, this is a reason why. But at the same time, I legally it shouldn't, because there are certain defenses that you can make to behaviors. Mental health defenses are some, but they usually have to do with, you know, knowing or not knowing about the behavior that you have, and knowing or not knowing the consequences of that behavior. And there are certain specific tests that somebody has to meet in order for those behaviors to be excused.
Also, Amber's team put forth that she's fine.
Also true. Very, very true. CK says, can BPD be learned by a parent who has BPD? This was something that I really was hoping to get into. Also, we just didn't have time for it, but was this idea that BPD isn't necessarily genetic, that it's sort of a thing that develops as someone is developing as a person into into their personality. And I'm so fascinated by that, just on its own, this idea that somebody's personality can be shaped over time through their experiences and not just be something that is like ingrained in them through genetics. But we'll have to ask them also when they come back, for sure. Lynn says, huge respect to Dr. Tracy for speaking as someone with a BPD diagnosis and help break the stigma while also showing incredible self-awareness. 100%. I think she is a huge inspiration to so many people for being someone who is, not just stepping forward, as a person, but also as a professional with the stigma that surrounds BPD. I have a tremendous amount of respect for her. Elise says, is Amber Heard recalling CPTSD nightmares versus a memory? That is also a very interesting question. I don't know if they would be able to answer that either based on what they said, because of the fact that they were saying, it's hard to dig into somebody's brain, right, to determine whether or not they actually know what they're saying is true or false. There's so much that's there, and there's so much there's still quite a bit of I don't know if they would put it as mystery, but this is the way that's the word that I would use. But
I would
a lot
too.
of mystery.
I doubt the doctors would, but I agree on mystery.
Right. Like this is just my word that I would use. A lot of mystery around like how the brain works still, right? So, but I don't want to put words in their mouth.
Right.
So trying to characterize their words properly here. Wild Child says, what effects, if any, does doing MDMA and mushrooms along with her prescribed meds, could that contribute to her delusional memory? That's another really great question. I'm already formulating the outline for the next conversation that I'm going to have with them if they'll come back. Terry Stevens, thank you. Miss Opinionated says, Legalbytes, thanks for PsychTube. I love it. I love PsychTube. I don't know if they refer to it as that, but I feel like that's what I want to call it now.
I just can't help seeing that old USA show with the fake psychics. It's just me.
Oh yeah, that's right. What are the differences between a psychologist versus psychiatrist? Never understood. So I imagine that Rick is verifying this for sure, but from what I understand now, you can look it up and double check me on this. But I think a psychiatrist is somebody who can actually prescribe medications versus a psychologist can provide therapy.
Yeah, and there might be other things, but yes, I think that's the primary difference that the lay people know, is that the psychiatrist can prescribe you drugs.
Yeah.
It says they have different education, different training, but the big one is authority to medicate.
There you go. Okay. So dang, got it.
Nailed it in one.
Grace J says, can you please discuss that JD says he originally started recording convos because he felt gaslit? Gaslighting is another issue that's very big in this case, because it's like this idea of like what is real and what is fake, and what are true memories and what are memories that are being reconstructed by the brain is like, it's a lot to think about and a lot to discuss in this kind of a case too. But I think that would be another very interesting theme to sort of hear their perspectives on it too. Atiye Bakhtiar says, any ideas on frequency issues in Dr. H's testimony? That one is for sure, I think, a question for them as well. Yeah. Sarah says, rewriting memories. I find it hard to believe she could truly take times she abused him, plus rewrite herself into his position and 100% believe it. I think, yeah, I mean, it's a lot of detail that she is testifying to. That does seem like it does seem like a lot. I agree with you, Sarah. 100%. I'm wondering if that really has a factor. I mean, number one, in repetition, right? This idea, there is this idea out there that, you can change your history essentially if you tell yourself the story enough times. So which is such a fascinating idea. But I mean, I've heard psychologists talk about that they'll say that like, you can change your history because of the narratives that you tell yourself. I wonder if you could do it to such an extreme as what we are seeing on the stand from Amber, assuming what she's saying is a lie. I personally feel very skeptical of a lot of the things that she says, but I'm just one person, right? Not everyone feels that way, is what I would imagine. But yeah, I mean, it's just it's interesting, and I wonder how much of that could fit into histrionic and borderline personality disorders. Iha Morris says, please play and analyze the tape where JD is pleading to AH not to get physical going forward, and she can't promise she won't lose it again. Well, we've heard that coming out in the testimony here. That might be interesting to get their take, listening to the audio and kind of reacting to it. So, another great one to save. And then maybe if I can set that up ahead of time, that might be a good one to sort of arrange some audio tapes for them to sort of talk about as clinicians. Louis Florence says, hey guys, I sent a chat earlier carrying on from it. How can us people with BPD respond to the whole everyone with BPD is a manipulative liar craze this trial has unfortunately started? I feel sad. Well, I think that one of the things that you can do is for sure go to the Truth Doctor, go to her channel there, support her, and a lot of the messaging that she has coming from her channel as someone with BPD. I think that's probably one of the best things that you can do is kind of amplify her voice, because she has a really, really great message coming from her channel on that. So that's one thing that I would definitely recommend doing. And I think also, just trying to fight back, on an individual level, this idea that everyone with BPD looks the same or everyone with BPD acts the same, and that the end story, is ultimately you end up like Amber Heard, and that's it. That's the end of your story. I definitely, I love a good redemption story. I love a good, comeback story. So for me personally, I would love to see a situation where, assuming that all of these things are true about Amber, she sees some contrition, she sees what's going on here, and that she's able to get the help that she needs, and that she comes back from it and has a lot that she can, learn herself and teach everyone else as well. Like, I would be a huge fan of that story. I don't know about you guys, but that's just me.
And I don't, this is not grift. I don't want to pitch strongly on stuff that this is important, but, Alyte having those folks on this channel and managing a space that doesn't make that assumption, right? That Amber Heard's an individual on her own, that all these things are being treated separately, that you can't take a diagnosis and say, thus, this is what's going to happen. This is a space that I feel very strongly that Alyte has built here to do that kind of thing. So yes, Truth Doctor, yes, Dr. Honda, yes, also Legalbytes, yes, also Alyte, making sure that, we avoid that kind of generic commentary on real disorders, real diseases that people are dealing with.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Rick. Thank you.
It's the truth.
Thank you. The Islander says, is there always a condition to explain bad behavior, or some people may just be mean and doing bad things consciously? I think, you could still always have a psychological reason to explain why someone does something. It doesn't excuse the behavior. And I think that's also, I think that's also what Dr. Honda and Dr. Tracy were getting at one point today too, basically to say, like, you can have somebody that has BPD and they have, all kinds of symptoms that show up from that, but it doesn't excuse the behavior that is causing harm to themselves and others. And so that's part of the treatment for somebody with BPD, is to get them to understand these things, to get them to understand that, like, that their behavior has certain consequences from the world. And so I think that there is a good way to sort of find that middle path between the two, right? To say, like, you can have a perfectly good psychological explanation, and it doesn't even, to respond more directly to the Islander, it doesn't necessarily have to have like a clinical, like, explanation for it. It could just be, I am someone who feels very self-conscious while talking to people out in public. So therefore, when I get into a controversy out in public, I have a tendency to withdraw. Like, that's not so much a clinical explanation, rather than just saying, I have this tendency and this is kind of how my brain works. And so this is, how I deal with things. So, and sometimes those behaviors might look mean. They might look, nasty to somebody else, but it's just sort of a subjective explanation. And it kind of comes down to that person also understanding objectively how that can look to other people. This is what a lot of people go through in relationships, right? Like every marriage has gone through all kinds of conversations between the two partners to say like, oh, hey, you did this thing that was really hurtful to me. And then the other person, hopefully says, oh crap, I didn't realize that you interpreted it that way. Here's how I interpreted it. And then hopefully you can have a healthy dialogue and a healthy discussion where you can kind of meet in the middle and understand each other, and hopefully not run into that issue again. That's usually the hope.
This might be hard to believe, but sometimes, I guess I should only speak for myself here. Lawyers can overly lawyer their spouse or significant other, and it is not necessarily a great thing.
Yeah, it's true. It's why I never wanted to marry a lawyer.
My wife puts up with me, and I'm blessed all for it.
Yep. Same with Mr. Bites. All the blessings to our spouses. May they put up with us forever until the end of our lives. Terry Stevens, thank you. Crystal says, study of visitors, no mental illness at Disney show how memory can be rewritten and influenced over time. Even a word choice in a question can alter the memory. Oh, that is so true. That is so true. And also, like, the way that people choose to remember things too can also have a huge impact. Like, if you go to Disneyland and you have certain expectations, like, this will only be a good day if I get to all of these big ticket rides, these e-ticket rides, and I go over here and I go over there and I have this experience and this experience and this experience. This is what I classify as a good day at Disneyland, versus you have somebody who has zero expectations and just says, I'm going to go around, and if I see my kids smile, it's a good day. Like, you can have two people that have the same exact experience, but come away with it with very different memories of those experiences, because, the way that you frame it can also like frame the way that your brain chooses to focus on different memories to retain from that, if that makes sense. Just speaking as a non-psychologist, just as someone that I've noticed.
That study sounds really interesting to me. Like, presumably
that does
it's like,
sound.
what color is the carousel pole or whatever, and it's like, if you change the wording around, you can get wildly different answers. I would love to check that out.
Yeah. Crystal, if you can send, I don't know if you have a link to it, but if you can send me a link to that study.
I'll also look it up, but I mean,
yeah,
it's fascinating.
Yeah, but yeah, if you have it handy, that would be nice, because that sounds really fascinating. Anetka says, question: after 4 weeks, BPD, will Amber Heard change from constantly looking at JD to change to avoiding because of social media noticing and criticizing her for being the AB? So I don't know. I based on the conversation that I had with Dr. Honda and Dr. Tracy, I think they probably would have hesitated to answer whether she will change, right? Because it's like, no one can really tell how someone's behavior will change necessarily, but you can kind of go off of likelihoods. Perhaps it's maybe the best that you can get out of a professional. But it would be interesting to see if she did go to avoiding his gaze or avoiding looking over at him due to the criticism. I mean, yeah, it would be interesting to see the change is basically what I would say. Deborah says, if AH has PTSD from JD, won't testifying trigger? I would think so too. This is something that Dr. Grande mentioned when he was talking about his reaction to Dr. Hughes' testimony. I did catch his video on that. But he said that, like, it's very strange that she says that she got her PTSD from the accusation of the hoax. So you would think that she would have PTSD reactions every single time the word hoax was brought up, or every time that something related to a hoax was mentioned in court, or when she's testifying as well. So that was a very interesting point, very interesting question, Deborah. Ophelia Odyssey says, when a person with BPD feels abandoned, the inclination is to inflict pain on the person who slighted them in hopes of validation. Also, thoughts on MBTI. Yeah, that does sound like what they were talking about, Dr. Tracy and Dr. Honda, about BPD and this feeling of abandonment by the other person. I don't know what their thoughts are on MBTI. I do know that it's one of those things that a lot of psychology clinicians have a lot less faith in, or less, I don't know if I want to say less respect for, but this is just from the people that I know, friends, especially that are psychologists as well. They'll say that the MBTI is kind of considered like bunk or junk science. But I do find it endlessly fascinating, just because, and for anybody that doesn't know what MBTI is, it's Myers-Briggs Typology Indicator. I do find it fascinating just because it's an interesting way for people to use certain language to talk about like what gives them energy, what takes energy away from them, introversion versus extroversion. The way that they choose to, the way that they prefer to like take in information, and the way that they prefer to make decisions on information. So I find that stuff very, very fascinating. I went down a rabbit hole on MBTI several years ago, like really, really hard rabbit hole. So I know probably more about MBTI than any reasonable person should. But anyhow, that's a total digression. Anyhow, Chris's error. Thanks for becoming a YouTube member. BPQQ365 says, what are the doctor's thoughts on how evaluations were used between both experts, particularly the cross-exam of Dr. Hughes compared to the way Dr. Curry was used? Oh my gosh, that's another great question that I will for sure save for when we can hopefully have a part 2. Vasco Marquez says, don't forget that the third claim is regarding the SA title of the op-ed. So even if a jury has doubts on the first and second claim, AH needs to prove SA accusations. And that is assuming that the JD's team can also show that she has enough ownership in the title to be able to attribute that to her. And so they are going to be for sure in the cross-examination getting into that text message where she essentially republishes it. And has her commentary to say, I wrote this thing. This is my op-ed, about the things that I went through. So there's going to be a bit of argument. So I think that, if they can successfully show to the jury that yes, Amber had enough ownership of that title to warrant applying that to her, then yeah, I think you're right. You're absolutely right about that. Gabrielle's planner says, what were your thoughts on Dr. H not fully filling out the test and leaving large sections blank? That was another one that I really wanted to ask them. And I was looking for this one. I'm so sorry, Gabrielle's planner. I was looking for it. I really wanted to get a little bit more into their thoughts on Dr. Hughes. Kelvin says, Dr. Hughes established perpetration, but never met Johnny. That's another thing that I think that they both seem to be very cautious about making any kind of diagnosis, making any kind of decisions, without enough time with a person. And certainly, without having ever met him, I think is something that a lot of psychologists have responded to. But that's a very good question, and probably one that should be put to them directly. Boogers says, doctors, what did you think of Dr. Hughes' assessment of the audio recording Cross put to her? It seemed as if she was hearing it for the first time. That's another really great question. I'm going to have to ask them. Brooklyn Park says, in a perfect scenario, what would you recommend Amber do if she wants to treat her possible diagnosis? And do you see her realizing she needs help from this trial? I mean, I think that they probably would point to what they said early on, which was like, successful methods that they've seen for treating BPD. Dr. Tracy talked a lot about mindfulness, and it sounds like very rigorous mindfulness practices, and just sort of regular reminders of how certain behaviors can result in certain consequences. And it was really interesting that she pointed to pointing to Buddhism and this idea of emptiness is okay. Emptiness is fine, for someone to sort of embrace. But yeah, and then with Dr. Honda talking about how having building this relationship, this foundational relationship with the psychologist, and then learning to apply that to other people in the outside world, outside of that clinical setting. So, but if they have anything above that, beyond that, I think that would be very interesting to hear. Yolanda Castillo says, do you think that they recorded each other as part of their therapy, like an exercise? Well, Johnny did say that he was doing it because he felt like he was being gaslit. And I mean, he didn't use that word specifically, but that's, another way of putting it. He said that he wasn't sure if the things that he was experiencing were real because of the way in which they were being denied by Amber. And it sounds like Amber has some sort of similar justification for her recording as well.
And the marriage counselor recommended it, right? I mean, I seem to remember that testimony. Marriage counselor said that with those specific issues she was identifying, recordings would be useful. Because at least as Johnny represented it originally, it was, I was doing taping because that was what we were doing to try to help ourselves. And then I can't remember what they described it as, but Amber was surreptitiously and illegally recording, whatever language they used. It was presented in that fashion.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I don't remember that specifically, but I'm glad that you do.
There's been a few weeks of testimony.
There's been a few details here and there. Chase Hughes says psychology diagnoses are wildly different than medical ones. It's nearly impossible to codify the mind and behavior like we can with a red blood cell count or a fever. Very good point. And that they did point to that as well. It's very easy to look at an X-ray and find a broken bone. It's a lot harder to do that with the brain. With some way that the brain is functioning or not functioning. Very well put, Chase Hughes. Gil says, big fan of Dr. Honda, now a fan and sub to Dr. Tracy. Great panel and keep up the awesome work, Alyte. Thank you. Yeah, they were both great. I can't wait to check out more of their content, honestly. Nintendo Gaming Channel says, Amber Heard is real life Allison De Laurentiis. Is that a Gone Girl reference? I still haven't seen Gone Girl.
I don't think so. I think if I recall correctly, that is a Gossip Girl reference.
Oh, okay.
Someone named this person before.
Okay.
We got it right. It's fiction. I want to say it's Gossip Girl. Yeah. I'm gonna say Gossip Girl, but no, I don't think that's right. It's one of the other ones where I frame it as
Pretty Little Liars. That's what they're saying in the chat.
I frame it as young women being not so nice to each other.
I see.
Okay.
Oh, yep. Now we got a lot of Pretty Little Liars.
You know what? The fourth time this one comes up, I'm still reserving us one more as a buffer. The fourth time this comes up, we're going to nail it.
Okay. Sounds good. Industry Rajan says, great discussion. Psychological diagnosis is not black and white, but rather more gray, just like human beings. Informed diagnosis equals ethically considering all available data, objective due diligence. 100%. I very much agree with that. And that's why I love having discussions like this. And gosh, I want more talks with more psychologists because this is so fascinating.
It's good stuff.
In fact, I early on when Mr. Bites and I were dating early on in our relationship, he saw how much I really enjoyed psychology because it's like one of those ways of understanding, like, why do we do what we do? It's why I studied history and sociology in undergrad. And I unfortunately only came across psychology a bit later to really dig into it. But he was like, you should go back to school and become a psychologist. And I was like, I can't do more school. I can't do more student loans, not after law school. But anyhow, that's neither here nor there, but I find all this stuff so fascinating. Brent Stewart says maybe one forensic psychiatrist should be agreed on by both parties and split the expense. In an adversarial context, though, there's no way that they're going to agree on that, right? Because you can have so many different people that have different perspectives, right?
I could agree in a vacuum. It's very utopic of a notion. I totally understand why that would be the concept, but I think if you have that and it goes against you, you can also understand why the other side would be like, nope, that's not fair, and then you wind up in the same place as you were.
Yeah, exactly. Kaylin Leon says, BPD 2, I heard my 16-year-old self in Amber Heard's tapes. Oof. Oh my goodness. Wow. Ooh. Well, Kaylee, I hope that you're not being stigmatized as a result of this. And I hope that you are feeling like you can be heard and understood in some degree, in some respect in this. And this is one of the reasons why I'm kind of leaning into talking through these discussions in a lot of these ways.
I think by the time you're saying oof, you're in the right place.
That?
Oh,
Mr. Bites.
We're getting third-person audio here, folks.
I don't know what he said though, because something about Maybe tell someone I said what up. I don't know. Sorry.
You know what? I'm going to assume that was for me, Mr. Bites.
I think so.
What
I think
up?
it probably was. Anyhow, not to cut away from the very, very, serious discussion.
No, all I was saying is I think by the time you're using the zipper face emoji and the oof, you've already advanced the ball. If you're listening to that tape and saying, oh, then
yes,
you're better off.
Yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree. And I think that it also just goes to show that like there are ways that people can improve their lives if they find themselves at a particular stage at one point. And, Dr. Tracy appears to be one of those really great examples of that. Amanda Villa says, what about Johnny's statement, "You don't exist"? Is this common with BPD? Do you remember this coming up?
I remember something like that, but I don't remember the context.
Yeah, I don't remember either. I'm so sorry, Amanda. Rain D says, wish diagnosis would be determined by 3 mental health experts hired by the court, not the lawyers. Example, like a separate MH jury, unbiased, to be helpful, not to hurt.
What's funny about that is in contract land, when we have to like do something that's not nearly this important, but we need to like set the price of a company. Sometimes we'll say you use one independent auditor. And sometimes if the parties are just really adversarial, we'll be like, we'll be 3 and we each get to pick one. And then those 2 will pick a third. And it's some kind of averaging. It's that kind of concept that could work. The resources are massive for the court and for the system.
Yeah. And I will also say just somebody who has some experience with, with the courts and whatnot, just because you have something that is set up by the court, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have that you'll end up with the results that you want, right? Like looking at the Britney Spears case, for example, in her conservatorship, she had a court-appointed lawyer for her because they had determined that she wasn't able to get her own lawyer. There are all kinds of things that can happen there. Now, that's not to say that conservatorships inherently are bad. I'm one person who has been definitely an advocate for the fact that like there are plenty of people out there that need conservatorships and that it is much safer and much better for them to be in a conservatorship. But anyhow, there are plenty of ways that even in that kind of situation, which you would think would be ideal and very neutral, it can still be somehow perverted by the fact that we have humans that are involved in the system. Triple C says, invite Chase Hughes into your live. He's in here. He actually super chatted earlier. He's a body language expert. I am probably going to have to send him an invitation. So at some point to come in and chat with us for sure. I would love
show
to.
Up within Alita's eye line. You're getting a DM.
Muffins and Megapints says, no need to read on air. Check your email, please. Oh, okay. I sent you a video yesterday. Cheers, lady. Keep up the awesome work. Thank you. Thank you so much. Because that's how you get ants, says, could the Amber Heard Moss comment show malice since Amber Heard is the only person to say it? No proof. Why Chew got pumped? Yes, rebuttal equals Curry explain different diagnosis. So the reason why he got excited is because that potentially opens the door for Kate Moss to come in as a rebuttal witness, which would be incredibly damaging to Amber Heard and very helpful to Johnny's case, particularly the case that he has to put forward, showing that he is not an abuser. So I don't know if that actually would show actual malice, however, because of if she's saying something with no proof, there's a lot of things that she's ostensibly saying that have no proof, or at least are provably demonstrably false. So anyhow, possible. I see a lot of people saying that I need to let Kurt into the chat. I will let him in. Give me just 1 second. I couldn't send this to everyone this time because I wanted to make sure to have let me see here. Where's Kurt in my DMs?
While Alita futzes with buttons to get Kurt invited to the stream, I just want to say, commenter, you made me laugh with your commenting name. I don't know why. I don't know why it's so funny to me right now, but because that's how you get ants, made me laugh. And I appreciate that. So we talk about some serious stuff here.
I love that it's a reference to Archer, the TV show.
It is.
I love it.
It just made me laugh. You know how sometimes something that's not really funny just hits you right in the right place?
Yeah, it does.
That was. Hey, Kurt.
How's it going?
Hey, good. How are you?
I thought there was a stream after party. Thought I'd come on.
Yeah, thanks. I've got to say, I've got about 25 minutes, and then I've got another appointment that I have to make.
Oh, I have a 4 o'clock too. So I was actually I was going to bail on you. So
okay. Well, cool.
We figured it out from there.
So I will say that if there are other super chats that I do not get to, I might do a stream later today. I might do a stream at some point, another point, to get caught up on these. So tomorrow I've also got latest in the law. So I'll be covering some topics. You guys are, of course, invited to chat about some stuff that's not Johnny Depp. So I know a lot of people are here that are interested in the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case, but there actually are some other things that are going on in the world aside from that. So possibly some things about Mario Batali, possibly some things about Trevor Bauer, the baseball player, maybe some other stuff. So we will see. I
have some thoughts on Trevor Bauer, Alyte.
You do?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I mean, a lot of people have thoughts on him, but that'll be a very interesting discussion. And those two in particular are also very kind of similar to this case too. Like we've got some BV kind of elements there, some defamation. Well, defamation from Trevor Bauer, not so much Mario Batali, but anyhow,
yes. By the way, Alyte, in the chat, if you didn't know, earlier today, Kurt did hit 70,000. It's a big day.
Yes,
Kurt, congratulations.
Got him there. Good. Awesome. Congratulations.
One step at a time.
I'm very happy for you. Yeah.
Congratulations on your verification check mark.
Thank you. Thank you.
Who has a check mark?
Alyte does on
in
YouTube.
Case people impersonate Alyte?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I didn't realize I dropped in on a celebrity stream.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry.
No.
I need to change my demeanor.
Martina Pagorin says, I know it doesn't matter for the trial, but just out of curiosity, could BPD be consistent with a not guilty for reason of insanity plea? I mean, like I said before, the jury could interpret it in a particular way that looks that basically says, like, well, we can kind of excuse some of her behavior because of the fact that she maybe didn't realize exactly what she was doing. But usually that's not how that's supposed to come into play. There are specific ways in which mental health can be used as a defense to certain behaviors. Explaining it is helpful. Excusing it, not so much under the law. There are only certain ways that it's supposed to happen in that way, usually. B555 says, can AH rebut 2 because of counterclaim and scope? She does not have the ability to rebut because of the fact that she is going second. So the whole purpose of a rebuttal is so that you have a chance to respond to what the other side has said. So she technically, all of her case in chief is kind of a rebuttal to his points, because she's able to respond with her witnesses. She's able to see everything, that all of the cards that he's laying out in front of the jury. She's able to see that and then respond. So it creates a little bit of an unfair advantage sometimes to the defense to have the plaintiff go first, because they have nothing to respond to. So having a rebuttal, it's very limited in scope. It's limited only to the new things that came up that the plaintiff was not able to talk about because there's nothing to respond to. So it's not really necessary for the defense because they've already responded to everything that the plaintiff has said, if that makes sense. Because that's how you get ants, says yes, rebuttal equals Curry explain the difference. Could A.H. Moss comment show malice since no proof and only A.H. has said? Possibly why Chu got excited. I think the excitement was in opening the door for Kate Moss to come in, because otherwise she wouldn't have been able to come in just in Johnny Depp's case in chief. So it has less to do with the actual malice and more to do with being able to bring in the sort of character evidence that otherwise would be impermissible. But because Amber was the one to bring it up, it is permissible. Lawn Lumber, hey, such a great stream. Just caught up on 2X. 1 hour isn't close to enough time. I know, but I'll take what I can get with these folks, right? There should be weekly Law Tube, Psych Tube streams because the overlap is huge. Yeah.
I have so many questions about Rob's day job. He's usually super chatting on everybody's streams while he's in hearings or otherwise at CLE courses. I think
we
have some questions, Rob.
I think he has a time turner that he's able to be like in multiple places at once.
Is that your first reference on this stream? I don't know.
It
All
is.
right.
It is.
You know, she never misses a video, folks.
Come for the law, stay for the movie references to Harry Potter and Mean Girls and Marvel movies. Megan Martin says, does the time used by the defense strike you as a lot? I would think they would have more time left, given that this is their turn to present evidence. Cross-examinations can take a long time. So, I mean, it's even though it's one party's witness, you can still spend a lot of time on cross-examination, and you can waste a lot of time on cross-examination too. So it's not exactly surprising to me that it's a roughly even split, with a little bit more used by the defense. Paul Bale says, why didn't Ben Chew cross Amber's expert? Because they had Mr. Dennison. I always call him Mr. Dennison because I never remember his first name. So I'm just like, Mr. Dennison.
I only just say Dennison. You're being more respectful than I am.
I guess so. Yeah. Well, because he's the guy that was handling all of the expert witnesses, and he did a phenomenal job doing the direct examination. So I understand why they also wanted him to do the cross examinations, because that is a difficult job. Directing an expert is a very, very difficult job for sure. Elgato says, years of Amica cream usage made AH unable to cry. Steve Cass says, if Whitney does testify, can Johnny team bring in Jennifer Howell deposition from England? She said Whitney told her Amber tried to kill Johnny. I think it depends. If certain things come up, they might be able to bring her in as rebuttal. She may also, I mean, I don't know why Amber's team would call her, but she could potentially be brought in as rebuttal if they think that's necessary. If they think that Amber's testimony even draws enough blood that makes it worthwhile to bring in someone. So, and if Jennifer Howell isn't able to come in person, then yeah, her deposition could be used, just like a lot of the other people that have been unavailable so far. Beautiful Disaster says, Seroquel makes us very tired, antipsychotic. Okay. Alyssa K says, thanks so much to these two guests. I work in mental health and have always viewed diagnoses as a starting point for treatment instead of just a static label. Forensic psych makes this hard. That is a very interesting perspective and a very good point. I think that's a brilliant way to look at it. And I think that's also a good way to sort of look at it without attaching a lot of stigma to it, to say, someone has a diagnosis and then they are, working with treatment. That's the starting point, not the end point. They are not defined by that diagnosis. And I think that's a very great point. Thank you for that. Mimi M says, EB still mad that JD left her for KM. Eve Barlow.
I got nothing.
Is mad at Johnny Depp that Johnny Depp left her for KM.
Oh, that's Barkin.
Barkin.
And who KM be?
Kate Moss. There you go. Okay. That would be it. Could be. I mean, yeah, that's what a lot of people have said. It was that Ellen Barkin is a woman scorned. I don't know. We will see. If that's true, we'll probably see that from her testimony.
Alyte, I'm going to actually pinged early for my 4:00.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump off. I don't know what else you're doing on this, but thank you to everybody who put in the super chat, supported the channel, like and subscribe to everyone. And I meant it when I said earlier, I think you're doing important stuff, like legitimately important stuff, by bringing in different voices from expertise. I thought that was a very cool video that you did. Yeah, I will talk to you later.
All right. Thank you. And guys, also, he is, just as before, Rick is linked in the description below. So if you have not already subscribed to him, please do go and subscribe, as well as to Kurt here, who has been joining us as well on basically every single day of these live streams as well. He's been spending a ton of time with us. And if you have not already, please do go and check out both of these guys and subscribe to both.
Kurt was on my stream just before yours, actually. We're getting pretty fiery about the Guardian being mean to LawTube. So I just put that video up. It's an archive.
Ooh,
I do have to go, though. Yep. Thank you so much.
See you, Rick. Keisha Delgado says, anyone noticed JD live on YouTube last night with Elon Musk's sponsorship? It was around 1 a.m. CST. Was the only video on Johnny's YouTube profile, and it's gone now. I heard about that. That was fake. It was fake. Don't fall for it. It was like an Ethereum kind of thing, like a crypto thing.
Oh,
Kurt has his
Ethereum.
Kurt Kurt, if you don't know, before trial began, Kurt has been hacked twice. Once was his YouTube channel, the other time was his Twitter profile. So
By the Ethereum people.
And actually specifically by Ethereum people.
Yeah.
So he has a very, very deep burning passion against Ethereum particularly. So yeah, it's a crypto scam. Sorry, don't fall for it. It looks, from the screenshots that someone sent me, it looks pretty convincing. So, but yeah, I completely understand. Yeah, people falling for it because it does look pretty convincing. Indushri Rajan says Seroquel is used to treat MOID disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar mania, depression. It's a mood stabilizer. Okay, thank you. Lauren L says Farm D here. Seroquel, when used at a low dose, can be used for agitation and sleep. Higher doses, 300 milligrams, is for antipsychotic effects, not diagnosing, of course. Okay. Interesting. Okay, thank you. Jaber says DBT is often recommended, especially for BPD and other PDs. CBT is the standard, more often used method. I have BPD and have benefited from both. Okay, interesting. Very good, very helpful point there. Thank you. Alrighty. Ryan Blackhawk says NAMI is a great org for info about mental health. Okay, yeah. I haven't checked this out myself, but that if you are interested in learning more, check it out for sure. Yeah, thank you. Chrissy Wagner says, do you think Johnny looks Amber in the eye while Camille has her on cross? That would be empowering for him, and I would love to see it. My guess is probably not. He's been very much busying himself with writing and drawing this whole time. So I think that it would probably be better for him to continue doing that because, well, I mean, on the one hand, he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. But I think that if he were to look her directly in the eye and stare at her while she's on cross-examination, I think that would look particularly aggressive to a lot of people. So I would caution against that, although that would look very satisfying for a lot of his supporters. Deborah says, can you send the doctors UNANS? I'm not sure what that word is, questions, and do an answer only vid. Oh, you mean the unanswered questions? Oh, yeah, we could potentially do like a discussion that isn't a live stream and then just answer the questions like that, possibly. But I also like doing it with a live stream format too, because I like how free flowing that can be. But I'm taking down these questions here that have been left over, and I will be formulating a part 2 if they are interested and have time at some point. David says props to Dr. Honda and Dr. Tracy. Thank you. Yeah. Really great to have him here. Katie Hawk, thank you. Nintendo Gaming Channel says Amber Heard is real life. Oh wait, Allison De Laurentiis. I saw this one earlier. Maybe that was sent twice. Lawn Lumber says psych/LawTube collab stream playing that card game. That's a really good idea. I like that.
Anything where we get to play games on stream, I'm down.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good idea. Okay. Thanks for that, Rob. I definitely want to reach back out to Dr. Tracy to see if she'd be interested in like moderating that or something, or whatever. Surreal Kit says, aside from the other objections I can imagine, how can Ellen Barkin testify? She's been all over Twitter. She's certainly seen coverage. That's going to be a question that's going to be put to her, is whether or not she has seen the testimony from this. So I would imagine there's been a lot that she would have seen if she's been all over Twitter, for sure. Very good point. Because that's a very fast way to exclude a witness, right? Aquarius says, hey, Dream Team, question, are rebuttals get crossed? And who does closing arguments first? And what do you think is better, first or last? Love you guys. Okay. Thank you for these. Okay. These are definitely ones that I can answer. And these are, I think we've gone through most of the psychology ones already. So rebuttals get crossed. Yes. Those witnesses go through the same procedure that all of the other witnesses do. It's just a different sort of chunk of the overall trial. So those witnesses will go through direct, cross-examination, and redirect, just like all the other ones. Who does the closing arguments first? Johnny Depp will, because he's been going first throughout the whole trial. It's the same sort of repetition here. The plaintiff goes first, and what?
Are you sure? Because usually it's backwards vis-a-vis opening, because the plaintiff is the one that has the burden of proof.
No, plaintiff goes first, and then it's defense, and then they get a rebuttal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That's right. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
stand
So
corrected.
because they have the burden of proof, they get to go first, and then the defense gets to respond to them, and then after that, the plaintiff gets to reserve some of their time for rebuttal.
That's
So
right. That's
they
right.
don't
Thanks.
they don't always do it. You can definitely have a case where plaintiff does their closing and then defense, and that's it. But usually, best practices are to reserve some time for rebuttal. And what do you think is better, first or last? Love you guys. I think. Thank you. Love you too. It really just the most compelling argument is the most important, really. But I do think that there are advantages to going first and last. So the plaintiff does get a certain advantage, but they also have the burden of proving their case here. So it's one of the advantages to being the first to file when you have counterclaims and cross claims, right? Advantage would go to that just because of attention spans and how you have the primacy and recency effect. But at the same time, you can also have a completely bungled closing argument by the plaintiff on both sides of that, and then have the defense come forward with a really great closing that is much more memorable and that the jury attaches onto. So, kind of a non-answer by a lawyer. So sorry. Lynn 2574 says, please consider inviting Pop Psych to your channel. Love his perspective as a psychologist. Oh, okay. Thank you. This is my first time hearing of Pop Psych. So thank you. Writing that down. Kitty Zhang. Wow. Thank you for the very generous super chat. For X of Dr. H, wonder if the reason the lawyer didn't ask have ever testified against F, abuse M, as if she has. You said before, lawyers shouldn't ask a question if you don't know the answer. So possible they didn't know 100% if she did before and didn't want to give an out. Yeah, that could very well be. It could be that they weren't entirely sure if maybe she had, in fact, defended or testified on behalf of a man in a heterosexual relationship, and allowing for that ambiguity, just kind of keeping that space open, that the jury can notice that too and kind of latch onto that and be like, well, wait, she's only listed, homosexual relationships that she has, found that the male has been a victim. That's a very, very, very good point. And that could be a good reason why he decided not to go there. Andrew Epperson says, I think I can assist with live captions. Can I email you? Oh yeah, please do. Please do. Thank you. Timothy G says, she said all on top of Xanax, adding to Johnny. I think this might be referring to the audio tape earlier. Okay. Interesting. Jaber says, I have BPD and PTSD. Thank you for talking about this. When mental illness gets the limelight, it's important to squash stigma and educate. 100% agreed. And so whatever I can do to sort of help that conversation happen in a healthy and an educational way, I am very interested in doing. Has not says, very, very happy I found you in this amazing community thanks to this trial. Thank you. I'm very happy you found us too. Industry Rajan says, if anything, IMO Cross will cause AH to double down on her narrative. BPDs are not able to tolerate the gray. They split to black and white, i.e. in this context, AH can't take responsibility. And I would caveat that with people with BPD in her condition, probably, because there are many people with BPD that have different types of ways that it manifests, I think, or at least different levels to which it manifests. And you can definitely have someone like Dr. Tracy, who has, been through a lot of her own treatment, to come across differently, very differently than Amber Heard. Zero Hex says, there is a wealth of audio out there that contradicts the character she has created for this trial, much of it out of her own mouth. Her deposition tapes would be included in that. Amy Horrell says, Amber's testimony, I really didn't know Johnny or his work. In her Rum Diary interview asked about JD. She said, who doesn't know JD? He's an icon. I've known about him since I can even remember. That could come up. Catastrophe. Thank you so much for the generous super chat. Says, there is audio from the July 2016 meeting where JD tells her point blank that she's not to blame for his turning to drink and drugs, but her treatment of him is the reason why he turned to boozing and drugs. Clips from doc series on Twitter can DM if curious. Yeah, I mean, and that could be characterized as him admitting to that, or it could also be characterized as him placating as well. Especially if that was July 2016. This is like that time period, like right after they are, going through their divorce and that whole thing. So yeah, for sure. Send it to me, DM it to me. I'll take a look when I have a chance, but thank you. Carly Sines says, question, if AH really has rewritten her memories and genuinely believes them, why is it she still cannot cry when telling the story? That's an interesting point. Very interesting point. And I think, oh, let me see what time it is, because actually I might have more time here. Let me see here. Give me 1 second. I always need to do these calculations for what time it is in various places.
You need a clock like the president has. You need 4 clocks on the wall at different time zones.
Yeah. Okay. No, I do have only a few minutes left. Okay. Yeah, you're right. I do need that. I need like several clocks for like what time it is in these various places. So why she still cannot cry when telling the story. I mean, I also caution because like people show their emotions in different ways, right? So I do agree that it looks kind of suspicious, but I try to kind of pull myself back from time to time, in remembering that people have different ways of expressing themselves when they're talking about things of a certain nature. And it can also be different depending on if they're at home comfortably on their couch talking to their mom or their best friend versus telling the world in front of cameras and in front of a jury.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But thank you for that. Joan Schultz, thank you. Loretta Blatt says, AH will testify differently than we've seen before. She's manipulative. A chameleon that will change to what she believes will gain her support. It could be. It could very well be, but that's not going to be good for her because any kind of changes are not good. Dr. Z says, as a neuro and forensic psych, I always get so nervous when mental health professionals do YouTube videos, but this was so well done. There are other differences. Psychologists can do testing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, whatever we can do to have nuanced discussion, I would love to continue to create that kind of content. Peggy Rudin says psychologists can prescribe certain meds. Oh, okay. So maybe some meds, but not others, I think. Christina Matson says, I wonder how many of her memories are actually just hallucinations from taking shrooms. One time she said there was no effect, but then recounted a fight with a cavity search that was bizarre. I don't know what kind of impact shrooms would have on memory, but that would be an interesting question to ask Dr. Honda and Dr. Tracy as well. Objectionable law, Ashley D. Harrison says, as a practitioner, I can't imagine a satisfying verdict in damages. I do not envy this jury. They have to sort through every single one of these issues. Can you imagine a satisfying ending? Very difficult. Very difficult. And that's why I think it's going to take a bit longer than I think what Kurt thinks as to how they're going to go through it. Because I feel like at the very least, they're going to want to talk about all of these things, even if they kind of have made up their minds just to be like, okay, am I seeing this the same way that everybody else is? Because there's been just a lot that they have been thrown at. Petty Crocker XX says, I'm a bit confused on how AH is calling JD as a witness, but JD's team is not allowed to bring in past partners. Are we sure that she's, JD's ex? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, other than the random thing that, to testify that 25 years ago or however long ago he threw something in a hotel room, I don't know what else that she would be testifying to that would be more recent.
Well, I mean, she can rebut testimony from Johnny Depp. So Johnny Depp has said quite affirmatively that he's never hit a woman. So I don't know whether or not she's prepared to testify contrary to that, but that would be valid.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair. Yeah, interesting point. Deborah D says, Alyte, you read my mind. Send AH to a retreat or 5 to fix herself. Write a book, do a tour, 5-year plan. I can honestly see that being a massive, wild success for her. Like that's how I could see her coming out of this successfully. It's not in any time in the next, 6 months to a year, but rather like 5 years down the road after doing a lot of hard work. I could see that. I could see that being the case here. And I would be in favor of that, honestly. If it were a sincere story and it looked totally credible, yeah, I could see that. Archmage Raven says, even though AH makes me sick and angry, I don't want to see her canceled. How will she pay the $50 million to JD if she can't work? I agree. Yeah. You are wrong, says no one goes out of their way to explain the psychology or physiology of a male abuser. Why do we need to for a female abuser? Abuse is abuse. Well, I think that this is one of those things that is not really a common topic that we hear about, having a female abuser, right? So I think that is more interesting to a lot of people in understanding, like, how can this happen? Because that's not usually what people think of when they think of abuse especially in a heterosexual relationship, right? So I think that that's one of the reasons why there's been a lot of focus on Amber's brain and the way that she's thinking of things and rationalizing through things. But I do agree that it's not an excuse for behavior either, though. Lori says, one picture that haunts me is the one of JD bashing the kitchen because of $650 million being stolen and the table being set up with 3 lines of Coke and bottle of booze cup. She set it up with malice / intent of pics. It certainly looks that way. That's up to the jury ultimately to decide, really. But I would agree that it looks that way. It looks like he's been set up in a lot of ways. Matt Watson says, do you think the jury, AH and JD, an expert witness, will actually research in the 1 week off? I hope not. Although Johnny Depp is I believe able to still talk to people. He's not on the witness stand.
Johnny Depp can do that.
He can do whatever he wants. And also the expert witnesses are able to continue evaluating the other testimony. Like, they're allowed to be in the room and watching, and so that they can respond to the testimony as well. Okay, probably one more. This might be the last one for today. And then the rest I'm going to have to just save for later. Maria says, Court TV correspondent said the jury smiled during Malcolm Connolly about seeing JD's you-know-what. And 2, we're focusing on JD during AH's day 2. Interesting. That is very interesting. I didn't know that, but that would be very interesting to see if they are watching him and evaluating his response to stuff. And then last one here. Okay. But that is about it for today. I thank you all so much for joining for this conversation. I'm sorry that I have to cut this off now. I really wish that I could continue with this for all of this. I know we've got some super chats here that are still saved away, but I will be going through those at some point, either later today, maybe not later today, maybe at some point tomorrow. We'll see. Maybe it'll be a morning stream or something to go through these and then cut it off and then start my latest in the law. I don't know. We'll see. Or maybe after latest in the law. All right. But either way, at some point I'll get through these. But thank you to Kurt for hanging out with me. Thank you, Rick, earlier for hanging out with me as well. And thanks again to Dr. Kirk Honda and to Dr. Courtney Tracy, Dr. Honda from Psychology in Seattle, Dr. Tracy from the Truth Doctor Show. Both of them, I'm so thankful to them for sharing their brains and their experiences and everything, because this has been a really, really great conversation talking about all this stuff. And I really hope that they will be happy to come back as well. And have more discussions, because obviously there's still plenty of questions that people have. So anyhow, with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.